the bottom line is this is a bloodbath for Republicans, and Democrats look really good for midterms, and it's all about Trump. Look, I mean, this is the point of making the last two episodes. You did this. It's all about
Yeah.
Trump.
Yeah,
It's all
it's
about
all
his
about Trump.
unpopularity.
It's all about his unpopularity. I mean, the second best result for Republicans last night, and hello to everyone joining us, they won a state house special election in New Hampshire by 14 votes.
I saw that. I did see that actually. Wait,
Yeah.
let me just put something up on Substack that. How do you do this? Uh,
As you're joining us, if you can click the like
there's
button so
literally
that
one
the more
person in.
people. No, I see 40.
You do?
Yeah.
I see
42,
one.
43.
I see one person. That's really strange.
Yeah, I see us now we're at 50. We're just going up
Why
from
do I
here.
have one?
I don't know.
That's very
It's
strange.
stopped at 48, but 49. So people are coming in.
Okay,
Um,
but that's weird though. I just only. Oh, now okay. Well,
see,
now I'm.
we're never, folks, we're never going to be the masters of this technology here.
The
Um,
technology sucks. Can we be honest? Can we be clear
that
about
that's
that?
the truth. Yeah. I mean, to let you guys in on the secret, I've got a light in a tripod over here. I got my computer over here because usually we prop the phones on the computers, but I need to be able to see my notes today. It would be easier to hold my phone and get my notes in there, but I can't use my computer to do this.
So I have my computer all. I have my laptop on. I mean, my phone on my computer, all to the left, so I can see what's happening on the right on my computer. By the way, I have the Substack Live up on my computer, although I can't do the video from there, and it shows 54 people. But on my phone, it shows one person. Something weird on the link
we,
I'm
we we
hearing.
may be investigating new technology as the weeks go here because it's not something that we have figured out. They haven't figured out a way to make it less maximize it. Um, but it's weird. So I don't know how many of you have an election night hangover. I know some of the forecasters, the few forecasters who got it right last night were breaking out the scotch late in the evening. But most of them did not do particularly well last
No,
night.
they really didn't. They really
And in
didn't. I
fact,
just
the pollsters, as bad as 2020 was with the polling error, the pollsters in New Jersey were abysmal. The best poll was off by 6 points.
yeah, I thought what's his name? Elliot Morris had a good point about that this morning, which is that um one of the reasons why that was happening is the modeling they were using was based on 2024 numbers, and that may be an accurate way to do this, but it
Well,
could be.
I said that last night on Twitter, that after the New Jersey polling, they really need to reconsider how they're modeling the midterm. I said this. Ron Brownstein said something about the midterms and the generic ballot, and it makes that NBC +8 number from Sunday look a lot better right now.
It
That
does.
some of these other lower numbers on the generic ballot are based on a bad model of what the electorate's going to look like
Right.
because the Jersey polls were just abysmal.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
That Atlas Intel poll that had it inside of 1 point, those people should just stop polling.
I mean, just dreadful. Just dreadful. They really clearly screwed something up there. Um,
Yeah.
so okay, it's about 104. We got about some people in here. That's pretty funny, Lynn Muster. You figured it's 1 p.m. Jewish time. Yeah, I
Yeah.
literally on my phone, it's saying one person's on this chat, and then well, I have it on my computer in the background, it says 61 people are on it. So who the hell knows? Anyway, so last night, what happened last night? Basically, Republicans got slaughtered, and there's no better way to put that. And Democrats absolutely dominated. And it wasn't just the big high profile races. It wasn't just New Jersey and Georgia. It was
You mean New Jersey
across.
and Virginia?
I'm sorry, I said Georgia. Sorry, New Jersey and Virginia. Forgive me. I have a little bit of
Freudian
a hangover too.
slip there.
Yeah, yeah, right. In Georgia, Democrats won two statewide races, the first non-federal statewide victories for the Democratic Party in 20 years. In Pennsylvania, Democrats were able to retain their three Supreme Court seats with a something like 24-25 win the
It was
point margin.
62 to 38 in two of the races and 61 to 39 in the third.
Yeah, so more than 20 points. In Pennsylvania, in Erie County, a county that Trump won by a point in 2024, the Democratic nominee for county chairman, won by 24 points. In
County
Bucks
executive, I
County
think they
executive,
called
sorry,
them.
thank you, right, county executive in Bucks County, where I grew up. The for the first time ever, a
Yeah.
Democratic district attorney nominee won an election in Bucks County. First time ever. Pretty
They
crazy,
won
actually.
district attorney,
And
sheriff,
sheriff.
and school board races up and down like blowouts all across Bucks County.
Yes, and also in a bunch of state, sorry, school board elections in Bucks County, Democrats ran the table. Democrats in California easily won the Proposition 50 vote on the referendum to redistrict the House seats there, which could give Democrats up to five or six new seats.
And the best part was I saw 12% of Republicans voted for that.
Wow. That's crazy. That is crazy. So here's the thing about this. If you're a regular viewer to these weekly chats, Two Bearded Jews Talk About Politics, none of this will be a surprise to you because we have been saying for weeks now that the Donald Trump's historic unpopularity is the defining, I don't know, variable in American politics today, and that is going to be very damaging for the Republican Party in on election day. And that's exactly what happened. I want to be very clear on what happened yesterday. There are all these debates about should Democrats moderate, should they be more liberal? None of that
Mattered.
mattered. None of it mattered. Okay. This election was about Donald Trump and people not liking Donald Trump. You look at the numbers overwhelmingly. The choice voters chose Democratic candidates to send a message to Donald Trump. And I want to point out also that Spanberger and Sherrill are both moderate Democrats. They began this campaign very early. I mean, you could probably, I would argue, before even last election. They didn't moderate because Matt Iglesias wrote a column about it. Ezra Klein wrote a column about it. They did it because that's the way they, first of all, Abigail Sandberg has always been that. She's always been a centrist candidate. And they've always sort of veered toward the center, as most Democrats do, frankly, even in places like New Jersey, which is a, relatively solid blue state, and they won. But it didn't even matter, really. It didn't.
Yeah.
I saw some idiotic posting the other day about how Spanberger pissed off the AFL-CIO in Virginia. That's going to help her with moderates. It didn't make a goddamn bit of difference. The margin between Spanberger and Sherrill was basically a point or two. And frankly, Sherrill's performance is much more impressive because the governor of Jersey is a Democrat and not a very popular Democrat. Okay, Sherrill's performance was unbelievably impressive because her opponent was better. This was a state that was 6 points, I believe, in 2024, and she absolutely dominated. Sorry, I talked too much. Please go ahead.
I mean that was 13 points in New Jersey,
13
which
points.
I mean I
Stunning.
was optimistic. I was kind of leaning towards 8 or 9, but this is 13, double digit stunning margin, and it was across the board in those Georgia races. I want to point out they flipped a Trump plus 45.7 county and a Trump plus 25.6 county. So in Paulding County, Georgia, which I'm not 100% sure where that is, but Trump got 62%. Last night, the Republicans got 50.9% and 50.6%. Cobb County, which is Atlanta, moved 38%.
Wow.
Like we're talking just massive amounts. There's some Latino data that I want to point to.
Yeah, the Latino
And
data. Can I just set that up for you? Because that Latino data is fascinating. Because don't forget, this was the argument for how Tittarelli could win in New Jersey by mobilizing Latinos the way that Trump had done in 2024. And there was this argument that's been going around for a while now that 2024 showed that Republicans have made serious inroads into the Hispanic community. Brian, what happened with
so
Hispanic voters yesterday?
Union City, New Jersey, and thank you, Steve Karnacki, for compiling this in one tweet, so I didn't have to sit and copy all this. Union City, New Jersey, 60+% Hispanic. Harris won it by 17. Sherrill won it by 69. That matched.
42 points.
Phil
Wow.
Murphy won it by 70 and 21. So she's right there. Now, Perth Amboy. Harris won it by 9. Murphy won it by 49. Sherrill won it by 56. So she
Amazing.
did better than 2021. West New York. Harris by 13, Sherrill by 57, and that's again 8 points up from Murphy. Passaic. Trump won it by 7. Cheryl won it by 26. She didn't get back to Murphy's plus 38, but she came a lot closer to that than Chinarelli winning it. Guttenberg, it was Murphy plus 55, Harris plus 20, Cheryl plus 52. North Bergen, Harris won it by 6, Cheryl by 35.
Amazing.
Prospect Park, Harris by 16, Cheryl by 55. East Newark, Harris by 6, Cheryl plus 37. And Patterson, Harris by 28, Cheryl plus 71. Okay, and for anybody who thinks this was just New Jersey, this is Manassas Park, I think is the name of the town, if I wrote it down right. Manassas Park in Virginia showed something very, very, very similar. Okay. It was it's 46% Latino. Harris won it by 20 and Spanberger won it by 42. Okay. And there are implications for this, not just for all the pundit class having egg on their face, but all that redistricting Republicans did in Texas, one key area was South Texas, right? Heavily Hispanic. They're making big inroads. All of a sudden, that gamble doesn't look so great today.
Can I pick up on that point? I
Yeah,
want to get to this point later. This is such an important point. The Republican Party redistricted in Texas in part because they thought that the inroads they'd made with Hispanic voters could be replicated in 2026. Last night's results seem to suggest that that might not happen. It is interesting to point out that Trump's numbers among Hispanics, which were, fairly positive for a Republican in January, have completely been reversed. And it doesn't seem to be a lot of that's the economy, so we're clear, but some of it also is revulsion at the mass deportation campaign that's being carried out by Trump and his stormtroopers, frankly.
goons.
Goons. Goons is a better way to put it. But yeah, the lawless goons. So what's interesting about that is that you may see Texas Republicans have a little bit of buyer's remorse for what they've done. But the bigger implication is that in Florida, where Republicans have been talking about redistricting in part because of the shift in Hispanic voters, they may have second thoughts about how much they want to push
Didn't
the envelope
I
here.
believe in Miami-Dade, it's been decades since Democrats won the mayor's race there, and I believe they finished first and third last night in the
Yes,
first round, and pretty heavily so they're heavily favored now.
yes, I think that's correct. So the thing is that you have to remember when you redistrict, what ends up happening is you tend to weaken that are, more solid, Republican seats in order to, take some of the Republican votes from one Republican seat and move them to another place, which will help Republican win there. But by doing that, you weaken the Republican candidates you took votes from. And frankly, if I'm a Florida Republican, I may not want to do this. And it's worth noting that in Kansas,
Yep.
Republicans threw the towel in on redistricting. They basically said, we're not going to do it. Right? Indiana looks very unlikely for redistricting to occur. Now, in Virginia, where Democrats have talked about doing this, now they, I think, are going to be completely emboldened to move forward with
Well,
redistricting.
but we don't have this data yet. But I was thinking about it this morning. I think they're emboldened. I think they do it. But guess what? I think they may only actually gain one seat by doing it because two of the Republicans would have lost anyway, based on what we saw last night. You
Well,
know,
that
it
may
just
be.
makes it safer and easier and
Yes,
cheaper to
but
do
that would
that.
be a three seat flip, which would be
Yeah,
enormous. And so, look, the Democrats in Virginia flipped 13
team.
seats,
Yep.
13 in the House of Delegates.
They
They have a
knocked off the dean
64.
of the
Yes,
House
that's
of
right.
Delegates. Bobby Orrick had been around since the late '80s, I think. They knocked him off last night.
They now hold a 64-36 advantage in the House delegates. 64% of the House delegates is Democratic. That's not bad, especially when your gubernatorial candidate won
And they
56% of
won
the vote.
five of the 13 seats they flipped were Trump seats,
That's right.
seats that Trump won. So they some of it was just winning the Harris seats, but they flipped 5 Trump seats
So
in Virginia.
I wrote this piece a week or two ago from MSNBC, basically speculating that redistricting might end up being a wash and could even benefit Democrats. And I feel more and more confident about that take because if you take Texas, if you take I'm not sorry, California, and Virginia, you're talking 7 to 9 seats possibly there that could flip. Just this week, Maryland announced a redistricting commission that will likely take away the one Republican seat held by what's his name, Harris.
Oh, did you see that sanctimonious prick, the state senator, saying, "Well, this proves that Democrats don't need to rig the system." Last night, this was one of the Democratic holdouts. He's got a lot of blowback. Maybe not the brightest thing to say.
No, I would say not. And also, I mean, look, Andy Harris isn't going to lose unless you redistrict. And I have a lot of issues with redistricting, but the bottom line here is that Republicans sort of started this. I hate to sort of use the playground epithet, but they did, and Democrats need to respond in kind.
And realistically, what they expose, Michael, is that there is a solution, but it's got to be national. It can't be
Exactly.
this state by state
Exactly.
where Democrats play the good moral guys and Republicans, do things to their heart's content. But to pick up on your point, last week there was a deal in Ohio on redistricting that local Democrats absolutely excoriated their leadership for taking, and national Democrats were kind of gleeful on. Well, let's now refract that through the lens of the election. The district that the local Democrats were most angry about is a Republican gerrymander in Cincinnati. Greg Landsman won his district by 9 points in 2024. Harris won it by 6.8. They swung that to a 1.9 Trump seat, a seat that Trump won by 1.9 points. Okay. Or it's an R plus 1.9 across multiple cycles. Okay. But the average pickup in those seats in Virginia last night in the House of Delegates was 4 points. Spanberger did 9 points, almost 9 points better than did Harris. Sherrill did 7 points better than Harris. In other words, that Landsman seat is looking fairly solid for him based on those results. Even Marcy Kaptur, when they made her seat like 8 or 9 points
Uh-huh.
Republican, she's been around for 40 years. She knows how to win those kinds of voters.
So I want to pick up on your point. The Ohio thing is fascinating. I just picked this article by a news outlet I never heard of before called The Rooster. I think it's an
I've heard
Ohio
of,
news
yeah, they're
outlet.
Ohio.
They did a report that basically says that Hakeem Jeffries went to Ohio and threatened a lawsuit that if Ohio pushed through a like 13-2 or I don't know 14-2, whatever it was, a map that was heavily favored for Republicans, the Democrats would fundraise to do a referendum that would force this to go to the voters, which would mean it would be delayed past 2026
Yeah,
and could
yeah.
possibly be killed. So Ohio Republicans were worried about that. So what they did instead was they offered this map to Democrats that is in effect a surrender. I mean, I know it's a strong term, but it's basically a surrender. They're basically saying we want to get one seat, Marcy Kaptur's seat, and maybe weaken the two Democrats. Although, frankly, those I think those districts are still D plus districts.
Well, no,
So
the Landsman's an R plus 1.9, but
okay,
the other one, the Sykes seat, got more Democratic, and some of that apparently was because her father's a longtime state legislator, so it was a good
interesting.
old boy network kind of thing
Well, the
where they took
Lansman
care
thing
of
is
their
he
own.
won by 9, I think, last
Yeah,
time around,
yeah,
didn't he?
he won by 9. Harris won that district by 6.8. They made it a Trump 1.9 seat, or it was either an R plus 1.9 or a Trump
What
1.9.
was it R plus before?
I don't remember
Okay,
offhand, but it was a Harris won it by 6.8, and now it's a Trump one seat. So, but it's inside of 2 points. Now, the local people freaking out, the activist class and stuff, they think Landsman's done. But what we saw last night would argue that's not true. That one Trump 1.9 is not safe for any Republican.
not in a wave election,
The people
not in
who
a wave election.
survived last night in Virginia were all Trump plus 5 or greater.
Yes,
Those were the seats that they held. Everything between Trump plus 1 and Trump plus 5, they lost.
yes.
And so, I think that is a seat that's in trouble. I think Don Davis may think, hey, I've got a shot down in North Carolina, their latest redistrict down there off of this. Amy Walter from the Cook Political Report said that like any Republican in a Trump plus 9 or less seat can't feel comfortable after last night.
Wow, that's quite a
And
statement.
yeah, I mean, and then think, okay, so this gets me to the broader implications of this,
Just want to
which
say, I put the Rooster article in the chat. People who'd like to read. I think it's behind a paywall, but you can read it. Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
so the broader implications, how do waves form? I'm going to put on my professor hat for a brief second here, because we academics love, lecturing on this kind of thing. But the way a wave forms is you get not so great polling data or election results, and then that triggers three things that make it a lot worse and get the snowball going down the hill. It's more like an avalanche, where Republicans may now retire. Some of them who've not had a hard race in decades may say, I don't need this. Or, who are now all of a sudden in districts that they think are much more competitive than they thought before today. So they start to retire. Meanwhile, Democrats may see recruiting wherever they've got holes to this point. They may see good recruits say, you know what, I want to get off the bench. This is a good year. This is a chance for me to win a seat that I might not win in another year. Watch Mary Peltola in Alaska. Does she
Yeah,
look at this and say, hey, this is going to be a good year? I can run for Senate.
or a
There's
governor.
or governor, but like Senate is the governor, she would be favored. Senate, it would be a toss up, but
Agreed.
that she's the only person who has a chance in that
Only
race.
person.
The
Agreed.
other thing to watch is whether in the next 48 to 72 hours and beyond, we see spikes in Democratic fundraising numbers, because this energizes Democrats who have been demoralized for months. This is saying, hey, we can make a difference if we work at this. We can, do things. And again, like Pennsylvania, it wasn't just Erie and Bucks. It was Northampton County, which swung to Trump.
Luzerne County also
Luzerne County.
flipped.
Luzerne County, which is one of the hallmark Obama Trump counties.
That's
The
right.
county level races flipped there. Lehigh County, which had flipped to Trump, I believe, in 24, flipped. Why does that matter? There are four House Republicans in competitive districts in Pennsylvania. Cumberland County. I said this for those of you who were watching me last night. There were 8 countywide elections in Cumberland. Cumberland is an ancestrally Republican county outside of Harrisburg. It's like a suburb, right? There are 8 county elections that were on the ballot last night. Democrats contested 4 of them. They won 3.
Wow.
Now these are
Wow.
local offices. These are not big deals. But if you're Scott Perry, that can't make you feel comfortable
No.
heading into 2026. And I always laugh about the fact that Kevin McCarthy before 2024 said Perry's going to survive this time. This is one of his antagonists. It's like he's going to survive this time, but he's done in 2026. And that may prove to be a good prediction. But like, in Georgia, if you're, in the statewide races there, this is the kind of thing that opens the door to a potential, hey, Democrats sweep the statewide elections. Why does that matter? It means all of a sudden you can't redistrict Georgia. All
Yep.
of a sudden the governor has a veto of that. So it's they broke the Mississippi supermajority last night.
Oh, yeah, can
After
I mention
courts,
that?
yeah.
Can I mention that? Democrats, they basically won 2 seats in Mississippi. They broke the Mississippi supermajority, which actually could have an impact on, well, I don't know how much of an impact it would have, but potentially on redistricting. Um, it's
Yeah, that's a good point. If the Voting Rights Act gets overturned, they may try to redistrict the one Democrat out of their delegation. Well, that makes it harder.
But can I say on the Voting Rights Act thing that I think it's important to point out? One of the reasons why, Democrats, I think, will continue to move forward with redistricting, even after, last night's success, even if Republicans sort of stand down, is because there's a reasonable chance that the Supreme Court basically guts the Voting Rights Act, which would mean losing all of these black majority districts in the South. And if that were to happen, you need to counterbalance that. I think that, especially with happening California, give Gavin Newsom some credit on this one, right? I mean, he put his neck out on this redistricting referendum, and it won handily, 20 something points. It was up when I last checked. It was in the over 60%. I'm sure when all the numbers are done, it's going to be even higher. He basically engineered this, and with Virginia, like what's Virginia interesting about Virginia is that the Democrats floated this idea about redistricting about 2 weeks ago. They paid no political price for doing that. Clearly, the voters are not upset with the idea of going forward. That's again 7 to 9 seats right there.
And what
Okay,
he
right
did
there. That
was
cancels out
signal,
everything that Republicans have done so far.
yeah,
Missouri, North Carolina, and Texas.
yeah, and what they signal, what Newsom signaled was, hey, even if it's legally difficult, there are ways to get around that if you're creative.
Absolutely.
Now, there were some states like New Jersey where it was literally impossible because they had a constitutional deadline that they couldn't get around. But like in Virginia, the idea came from Newsom to say, hey, you guys can hold a special election and no court is going to interfere with the outcome of a popular election result.
But here's the thing. Democrats can do New York in 2028. They can do
Colorado.
Colorado, which could flip 3 or even 4 seats because it's a 4-4 thing now. They could do it in Minnesota. They could potentially do it, I think, in Oregon or Washington. They could do it in Michigan, New Jersey, though it's unlikely in both those places for a variety of local reasons. But again, if the VRA, Voting Rights Act,
Minnesota.
is gutted, yeah, Minnesota, yeah. If it's gutted, the pressure on Democrats in places like New Jersey and Michigan, which I think at this point have, resisted it, will get worse, get harder for them. So I'm going to go on the record here and say I think at the end of the day, redistricting is going to help Democrats more than Republicans. I know it's
And
a crazy
I
notion, but I think it will.
Well, I think it will probably for by 2028. I'm not.
By
I think
28,
there's.
not
I think
26.
there's a lot of uncertainty still about 26. There's now a new case in Wisconsin that may yet flip a couple of those districts. And their gerrymander, Republican gerrymander. That there's a court case in New York where they may throw a bunch of Brooklyn into the Staten Island district.
Yeah,
And Nicole Maliotokis, who was busy being a pundit on CNN last night,
yeah, I saw
may
that
may no longer be a rep, so she may be available for them if they want her for
full time.
more, yeah, full time. But I do think that what we'll end up seeing out of this is eventually a national solution where both parties say this is exhausting, this is only hurting ourselves, like self-interest kind of thing. The other thing that we should point out that was relevant last night is Republicans had a ballot initiative on the main ballot
Yep, good
to
one. Thank you for bringing it up.
restrict mail balloting and to enact voter ID law, and that lost. Now,
Yep.
interestingly, they also passed a red flag law, which Janet Mills opposed, showing her moderation. But the voters voted for that like 60 to 40. But like this was total. The only win that I saw of significance for Republicans, and this the left isn't gonna like this, what I have to say, but it was Nassau County on Long Island. They held the county executives thing, and I assume that's probably a reaction to Zoran rising in the city there, where the people out in the suburbs said, we're not real comfortable with where this Democratic thing is going.
Can I make a can I want to say something about the New York mayor race because we haven't
Sure.
talked about it at all. And I don't have a lot to say about this other than, well, okay. Mamdani got about 50, just under 51% of the vote, which is better than I think what the polls were showing, which had him around 45%. So credit to the Mamdani people for playing the expectation games well, because they basically said if it gets above 50, it's a mandate. It's not a mandate. 50% as a Democratic nominee in the city is remarkably unimpressive. And 49% of New Yorkers voted against um, Zohran Mamdani. So that's a big deal. And I think that, although actually it's not that different from what Adams did. Adams, I think, got 53. He won by a few points. But that's because of ranked choice. That was in the primary. But in the general, of course, he won big. Um, so Mamdani does not have a mandate. He is opposed by pretty much half the city. And I got to say, last night in his acceptance speech, I thought was one of the most classless things I've seen in a victory speech ever, where he basically got up there and said, good riddance to Andrew Cuomo. Didn't thank him for a good race, didn't offer a fake lead. And by the way, you don't do that. I get a lot of idiots in my Twitter feed who are like, oh, why should you say something nice about someone who calls him a Muslim or a jihadist? I'm like, that's not why you do it, right? You do it
To show
because you're
your own
saying, now,
class.
I'm sorry,
To show your own
to
class
show
that
your own
you
class. That's the first thing. The second thing is just as an olive branch to Cuomo supporters.
and
41%. Yeah,
let's contextualize this. When they Cuomo brought up Mondani and congratulated him on his win, people started booing at his headquarters, and he said, "No, that's not who we are."
exactly.
And in Virginia and in New Jersey, both Cheryl and Spanberger shouted out their opponents. Both of them faced booing, but they kept going and saying, "Look, no, this is painful for them. They're honorable. They served well. Like that's how you do this."
When you get outclassed by Andrew Cuomo, you've done something. Okay. That's the first thing. Okay. The second thing is, I watched Spanberger's address. By the way, she is not the most charismatic speaker in the world, which, by the way, we'll get to that in a little bit about just speaks to, the sort of the anti charisma of Democratic candidates this cycle, at least, outside of New York. But she actually referenced her opponent,
Earl Sears,
Earl Steele. Thank
Earl
you.
Sears.
Winston
My
Earl.
favorite thing last night was somebody said, "You win some, you lose some."
There you go. There you go. There you go. It's good. Referenced her military service. I thought was a really classy thing to do, and really kind of gave her a nice shout out, even though Earl Sears ran a really negative, harsh campaign against Spanberger. So first of all, he does this, I think, again, completely classless to basically say, I wish Andrew Cuomo best of luck in private sector because he's done and he's gone and done or whatever. That was just really rude, I thought. Then he did something even more dickish, frankly. He referenced directly statements made by Andrew Cuomo's father, Mario Cuomo, as if to say that you, as a son, are not the man that your father was. Like, I'm sorry, what is the point of that? Like, you won. Be magnanimous. That's what you do in politics, right? Joe Biden didn't shit all over Donald Trump when he got elected in 2000 and when he won in 2020. That's what you do. And as somebody, look, I said this before, I didn't vote for Mamdani, and I don't like Mamdani, okay? But I mean, I want him to succeed. He's my mayor now, or he's going to be my mayor now, right? But I'd like to see him at least throw me a bone. And I did vote for Cuomo, even though it broke my heart to have to do so because I can't stand the man, but I did. Um, but having said that, like, what is he saying to me and people like me who don't trust Mamdani? They're saying, I don't give a shit about you. So I thought it was classless. I thought it was bad politics. And I don't think it bodes well for what he could do as mayor. I really
And by
don't.
the way, the other person who did this kind of thing in a victory speech was Donald Trump. And that's not really company that you want to
No, it's
keep
not.
if you're a liberal Democrat. The other thing that annoyed me about the left's reaction to Mamdani was saying now we need to primary Hakeem Jeffries and Schumer. Now here's the truth. If you primary Hakeem Jeffries, you tie him down to his district. That means instead of going and raising gobs of money for Democrats fighting against Republicans across America, he's going to be focused on his own backyard and pouring money into it.
Why would you
Why?
primary Hakeem Jeffries? Why?
Because he wasn't nice enough to Zoran, you see. These people are just clowns, some of them.
Now I hear that,
And
yeah, they're
and,
clowns. That's right.
and again, that Nassau County race, if Zoran's not winning, that may well, I think, go Democratic, given what we saw everywhere else in America. You
You know,
know,
yes. One more thing
that
on this point. Like Schumer did not endorse Mamdani.
no.
And I think there's a reason. Look, you can criticize Schumer if you want to for that, but Schumer is a smart politician, and he did this for a reason. He thought it would be a liability, especially if he seeks reelection, to be seen with Mamdani, aligned with Mamdani. And he may also be concluding that Mamdani is not going to succeed as mayor, and there's going to be a backlash against him, and he wants to be the other side of that backlash, especially if someone like AOC challenges him in the primary.
And let me make two other points. One, I thought AOC actually made a really good point last night, where she said, "Look, I'm a millennial. We've been called socialists my entire life,
That was
Democrat."
a good line, actually. I agree.
And it really does. I think when you start calling every run-of-the-mill liberal a socialist, all of a sudden the charge loses some of its
It
potency.
loses some. Yeah,
But
I
but the
agree.
other thing I want to stress about Mamdani is I had NBC on last night mostly because I like Steve Kornacki putting up the old results versus current results in counties so I could see how the counties are moving. But they had Hogan Gidley on, who was the Trump spokesman. And let me tell you something, the man had the worst comb over I've ever seen. And he tried to piss me off all night by saying Democrat instead of Democratic, which is, is a dig,
Nothing makes me
but
more annoyed
it
than that.
just annoys me to no end. But
To no
he's
end.
sitting there, literally, you could see the saliva dripping from his mouth, saying, Mamdani's now the face of the party. AOC's the front runner for president in 2028. Like, Republicans are desperate to make this happen. Ask yourself, if they're so keen on this, maybe just maybe this guy is not playing well in those Georgia, places that flipped last night.
100%.
This is just political math. And by the way, for those of you who say, I'm not pushing back on what Michael said at the top about, candidates didn't matter that much. But I do think that this is a good point to bring up Jay Jones.
Yeah,
Because
it's
Jay
true.
Jones is the scandal tarred attorney general elect in Virginia. And he won last night. And he won because Abigail Spanberger won by such a margin. Everyone's like, well, the Republicans are saying, well, Democrats have no morals now. But here's the thing about Jay Jones. The three statewide races in Virginia last night. Spanberger won I checked about a half hour before he came on. She won by 14.6. Now, you can assume that some of what caused the drop off thereafter was about racism because her lieutenant governor elect was the first Muslim ever to win a statewide office in America, by the way. And
Muslim
she
woman.
won, Muslim woman, and she won by 10.8
Yeah.
points. Okay, so there was a drop off, but Jay Jones only won by about 6 points.
Yeah.
Okay, so that shows you that candidates matter. If Spanberger had only won by like 8, Jay Jones probably doesn't win because of the scandal. And that is a lesson about both the Mondani types who are too extreme for a lot of swing places, but also about our buddy Graham Plattner up in Maine, which is to say, baggage doesn't help you.
Nope.
You may be able to overcome it in our current environment, but it's still going to hurt you. It's still going to cost you some voters who say, you know what, I'm voting for the other Democrats, but not for you. And that was especially true in suburban places, those places that like to vote for Susan Collins. Somebody had a great chart last week that said that, why did Susan Collins win? Because she did a lot better with older women
Yeah.
than Donald Trump did in Maine on the last time she was on the ballot. Well, where are those older suburban women gonna, go? They're not gonna go for the young guy who said all these edgy or flat out bigoted things and has the Nazi tattoo on him. They're more likely to go for the older woman governor.
I I want to just say I agree with everything you just said. I want to go a step further and point out that Spanberger, I watched her last night. I have not seen her speak before. Okay.
Not a lot of charisma
She
there.
is not a charismatic speaker. And this is, I'm just saying, she was almost to the point of like a mediocre public speaker. I was really unimpressed with her, but her message was great. And she comes across as like a normal person, a little
I
milk
think she
toast, but
said
normal.
you may remember the quote. She said something like Virginians voted for pragmatism over like
Yes,
extremism or
yes,
ideology or something like
yes.
that.
She outran every one of her opponents. I mean, her opponents, her fellow people on the ballot. She, as you point out, which is, I mean, look, she ran against a terrible opponent, and that certainly helped her. Um, but nonetheless, she did much better than Jones. Much better. I cannot remember the lieutenant governor's last name. Hashmi.
Some
I can't. I'm sorry. I apologize. I can't remember
I
her name.
remember that she's a teacher. I don't remember the name. I feel
No,
bad
I don't
about
either.
that,
But
but
I wanted to point out, I think it's pretty cool that Virginia, which, was a Confederate state, just elected a Muslim American woman as that governor.
and look,
I think it's kind of
a-
awesome, actually.
as much as I don't like Jay Jones, a black attorney
Yeah,
general.
like Attorney General, right? But don't forget, Virginia also was like the first state to elect a black governor or something since like Reconstruction, when Doug
Doug
Wilder won
Wilder,
in
yeah.
eight. Doug Wilder, yeah. But
And
nonetheless,
by the
I'm just
way, Spanberger's victory, just to contextualize it, was the largest gubernatorial win for a Democrat since 1961, since like the segregationists. So it
oh, that's
broke the modern record. It broke the 1965
crazy.
three-way result. It would like we're talking massive.
Massive. So, but my point of bringing this up is that the success of Spanberger and Cheryl, who's also a very, I talked to your friend Steve Danley about this, who we had on last week or 2 weeks ago, who pointed out that she ran a very milk toast campaign. Focusing on her bio as a Navy a helicopter pilot, and that is a good model for Democrats. You don't need to be flashy to win. You need to be actually normal. Normal is really good in our political moment that we live in right now in the era of Trump. And that's why I go back to what I said before. Janet Mills is a boring, milquetoast, normal politician. I don't say those things in a negative way. They are positive aspects of her candidacy, and they make her a much more compelling candidate than Graham Plattner. And by the way, this isn't even about moderation. This ridiculous debate. I mean, it has just gotten out of control. The way that these pundit bros talk about moderation. It's not about moderation. It's about basically being a normal person. It's basically a bit about being somebody who seems genuine. It's about, I mean, and look, I don't like Mamdani. He does come across as very genuine. Guy's got a great smile. I understand why people find him appealing. I do get it. That is how any politicians of any party are successful. Trump is sui generis. He's not moderate. He's not normal. He's a prick most of the time, and somehow that appeals to sort of the fever-brained section of the electorate. But it is not a model that's worked well for Republicans. It is not a model that's going to work well for Democrats. Elect normal, boring people. That's how you win elections. By the way, Joe
And
Biden, kind of normal and boring also, just for the record.
I mean, I also thought I heard both Cheryl and Spanberger. I thought Cheryl was better than Spanberger last night,
She
speech
was.
wise. A little bit more charismatic, and of course, I have sympathy or I have affinity for anyone who comes out as Springsteen because I'm a diehard Springsteen guy.
Sure.
But both of them, it also struck me they had their teenage daughters standing behind them, beaming. Like talk
Cheryl
about
has 4 kids.
normalcy. Yeah,
Cheryl has four. That's insane. She has 4 kids
n
and she's won the governor's race. That's impressive.
Navy helicopter pilot, congresswoman, mother of four, and these are not like adult children. These are
No,
still at
no.
home children. But like that kind of normalcy, it connects with people. It connects with families when she says, "I'm fighting these same battles you are in terms of affordability and other things." And it's just about normalcy and people who say, "Okay, in the craziness of the Trump world, I can trust you to not do something batshit insane."
Yeah.
That's really what matters. And I also think that the other point that came across somebody I forget who the reporter was this morning, it might have been Greg Bluestein from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, was saying that when whoever won is the state chair of the Georgia State Democratic Party, that when that person won in like February, Ossoff told the reporter that Republicans are going to rue this day. and that this was the first piece of evidence of building a grassroots machine there. And there was a lot of people in Pennsylvania who credited the grassroots efforts in some of these counties. So the
Interesting.
organizing matters. It's the candidates, but it's also organizing and getting out there and door knocking and building kind of networks and turnout machines. Because part of what kills Trump, I hate Nate Silver, but one of the things he said last night that was accurate is we have a pattern here since 2016. When Donald Trump is actually physically on the ballot, Republicans do better because he brings out
Yeah.
people who don't otherwise show up. Every
Thank.
other time, he just brings out Democrats
By the way,
who hate him.
thank you, Captain Obvious, for that one, Nate. I mean, honestly, like that doesn't. It's obvious. We see
Yeah.
this in every election. 22, we saw it. 18, we saw it. Every
Yep.
friggin' special election since 2016, we've seen it. I mean, come on, this is like
Yeah.
we know this.
I mean, I think that's very important. The other thing I want to point out while we're talking about the New York mayor's race, most interesting number, and I can tell you exactly who these people are. 9% of voters selected both Trump and Mondani. And those are the people who are so fed up with the system that they just want someone who's going to take a wrecking ball to it. And they don't really care about ideology. These are just like the Bernie Trump 2016 types who voted for Bernie in the primary and then flipped to Trump. They just want to blow the system up. And there are those voters out there, politicians should take them seriously that there's a lot of people who feel like the system is not serving them well. But those people who want the extremes are the minority. The
Yeah,
people who want Mikey Sherrill, the people who want Abigail Spanberger, they're the majority. I took this number down. Sherrill and Spanberger combined to flip at least 11 counties last night that Trump won. There are two other counties in Virginia that Earl Sears is still up by zero point 0.1 and zero point 0.2, so they may yet flip. But there were 11 counties that the two of them combined to flip, which is a huge number, including maybe the most important of them. It's not the most significant, but the most important. Cheryl flipped Morris County, which I believe is a big chunk of Tom Keene's congressional district,
yeah.
which is important because that's a swing seat. And then the other one that I laughed at is Spanberger flipped Lynchburg, which is for those of you who
Jerry
followed.
Falwell territory.
Yep, that's where Jerry Falwell
Wait,
was based.
let me cut in for a
Uh,
second here. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Finish your point. Go ahead.
no, answer that question that's on there if that's where
So
you're
three
going.
things I want to say. First, I just realized I did not have my AirPods in. Can everyone hear me okay? If anyone can't hear,
Okay.
you can hear fine. If
Yeah.
anyone is having a problem hearing me, I can go grab them, but otherwise I think it's fine.
And that's a
Okay.
good ad for Apple. Apple, you should sponsor us. Michael's talking about how good the
Yeah.
microphone on your phones is.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so I got a couple questions about Mamdani. Somebody asked, so you don't think Mamdani is normal? Um, I look, I think anybody who wants to be mayor of New York is not normal. That's the first thing I'd say. But no, but jokes aside, I don't think he codes as normal to a lot of Americans because, first of all, he's a socialist. I mean, obviously, he's very liberal in his views. So I think when I'm saying normal, I'm saying sort of the way that most Americans, ordinary Americans in swing states especially, code as normal. He didn't run a swing state. He ran New York City, which is totally different beast than you'd have in it. That's why comparing him to Spanberger and Sherrill is kind of difficult. Although, as somebody points out, and I think it's true, he did run an affordability message. It is interesting to point out, however, that I think Cuomo did best among working class New Yorkers, and Mamdani did best among college educated liberals, which I think suggests that he wasn't winning. He won a little bit on affordability, but he won more on just being not Andrew Cuomo and being a liberal. Um, so somebody says, and by the way, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I'd love to answer them. Um, so so Matt Krause says, neither of you are big fans of Mamdani, but don't we need to be a Big Tent party? He's for affordability. Why is it going to be so bad for the party? He's incredible orator and universal child care affordability. How does he not have a place? He has a place. I agree with that. He has a place.
And hi,
But I
Matt.
do.
Matt's a friend of mine.
Oh, hi, Matt. Good to meet you too. You're right. Look, he has a place in the party, and I actually think it's good for the party to have a diversity of politicians like Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger and Zoran Mamdani. But I do think you have to draw some conclusion from the fact that you know Brian brought up the Nassau Republicans doing well. Schumer not endorsing him. I mean, Schumer is not an idiot. He's probably running for reelection, and if he's not endorsing Mamdani is because he sees being linked to him as a liability. I think there's something you read into that, in that Mamdani might be popular in New York. I don't know if his popularity is going to extend outside of New York. And you've already seen a lot of Albany Democrats, including Governor Hochul, who did endorse Mamdani. I think she had to, but who I don't think are really on board with his agenda. So I guess, like, I think it's good to have a big tent. I do think that Zoran has a lot of liabilities, particularly around his uh, views on Israel and his support for socialism. I mean, look, I don't have a problem. I have no problem really with the socialist candidate. I really don't. But I do think that a lot of Americans do, and it's something that's easily caricatured. And so somebody asked, he's working for free childcare, free buses, and freezing the rent, blowing up the system. First of all, the freezing the rent thing is going to cause my rent to go up. So I'm not a big fan of that personally. I think the rent control stuff I hate because it basically says to people who have rent control apartments, you don't have to pay more rent. But when you do that, it ends up increasing rents across the board, including people like me who actually do rent their apartments. Um, I'm all free childcare and free buses. I mean, those are great ideas. How the hell are you going to pay for them? Okay, he's not going to be able to raise taxes. He doesn't have the power as New York mayor to raise taxes. Albany is never going to go along with something like that. We have enough issues in the city already. I don't really know if I support the idea of free buses and free childcare. I think we have other issues we need to concern ourselves with when it comes to New York. And I guess, but here the thing is, he's not going to be successful. Right? I was struck by a poll result last night that showed that half of New York City voters do not think Somali's platform is realistic, which tells you they're not wrong, by the way, because the things he wants to do cost money. He has no ability to raise revenue, at least not in a significant way. He's not going to get Albany to go along with these tax increases, and I think they're going to resist a lot of what he wants to do. I think he is going to be um, an unsuccessful mayor. I also think his lack of experience, his I think his lack of political intelligence from what he did last night with Cuomo. I think all of those things do not bode well for his tenure as mayor. I hope he succeeds. I live here. I don't want an unsuccessful mayor. I just had one in Eric Adams. I don't want another one. But I am not hopeful for Mamdani. And I think that whatever I take your point that he is an interesting politician. Look, I wish I liked him. I look at him on TV and I think that's a guy that I wish I liked because there's something inspiring about his story and inspiring about his message. But I personally have issues with his views about anti-Semitism and his views about Israel. They bother me. They bother me as a Jew. I worry about an increased anti-Semitism in New York because of his election. I worry about that when there are anti-Semitic, when there are clashes between anti-Zionists and pro-Palestinian activists and the the New York Jewish community. I worry which side is going to take. I don't think it's going to be the side that I'm on. So I worry about that a great deal. But I also think that what he is pushing is not realistic and is not going to succeed. Not that I think that he doesn't represent hope for a lot of people. I think that hopes are going to be dashed. That's my view of it. And again, I hope that I'm wrong. And
I
maybe I will be.
I would co-sign most of that. Um, I was saying this last night on Twitter. My beef with Mamdani is solely on anti-Semitism. That comment that Michael read last week about the IDF and the NYPD that can only be interpreted as anti-Semitic. There was
And it was,
a
by the way,
rabbi,
18 months ago he said that. It
right?
wasn't like
That
5, 10 years ago.
there was a rabbi of a liberal congregation who was saying that he's trafficking in some of the oldest
Yeah.
anti-Semitic tropes that are out there. And what I would say is I'm a lot more bothered by that than his socialism. I said this last night. I think AOC is a healthy figure in the party. I think she's incredibly charismatic. I think that she's very smart. I think she's getting savvier as she goes. I believe in a big tent party. And in terms of Mondani's program and ideas, I have some skepticism that any of it is actually going to be effective in doing what he wants to do. However, I want it to work. I would love the solution to problems like childcare and housing to be, hey, let's just do a government program because that's a much easier solution than some of the alternatives. And by the way, we're going to have a much bigger experiment, or I think better experiment. The Democratic governor of New Mexico, I believe it was, announced yesterday they are going to do free childcare
Yeah.
in there to try to boost their economy. And again, I hope it works. I'm somewhat skeptical, not just because of the cost, but because there have been some things that have been done that have shown that some of the stuff that he wants to do has backfired where it's been tried. And like, I think that it's healthy to have a coalition that includes him. I just think we need to be very, very, very careful about understanding where that kind of person can win and where they can't. That if you run a Zoran like candidate statewide in
Anywhere but New York City.
right. Right, right. I mean, it's just, it's anathema to swing state voters, to, red state voters. And I think, look, positive message, affordability, someone who's young enough that families can say, okay, this guy might get the problems that we're facing. Like, those are all good things. And I hope he succeeds. I want him to have, a good mayoralty because that opens up a lot of possibilities on the left, but in terms of doing liberal programs and liberal things that I want. But I'm not real optimistic about it. I'm not real optimistic that the socialist program that he has is going to work. I do believe in Democrats wanting to do big things. I think that that's, a good thing. I do believe in the fact that we have to deal with housing costs, that is the most important issue economically facing Americans. So, I wish him well, but I also am not terribly impressed by the fact that he beat a sleazy, scandal-tarred
Yes,
guy by eking over the 50%
I
bar.
want to just say that one thing on this that I think is very important, that he is making a mistake that politicians have made for time immemorial. And I wrote about this actually in my 68 book about Lyndon Johnson, um, believing that he won because of the Great Society and not realizing he won because of people wanting to, because of JFK's assassination and because he ran against Barry Goldwater. Mamdani won in large part, not completely, but in large part, because he ran against a terrible candidate in Andrew Cuomo. That's a big part of why he won. A lot of people voted for him, didn't vote for free buses. They didn't vote for free bodegas. They didn't vote for anti-Zionism, although certainly some did. They voted because they didn't like Cuomo. I voted for Cuomo. It took me 2 minutes to press that to do that, and I hate myself for it. I really didn't want to have to do it. I should have written somebody in, but I felt like I was taking a I was what's it called? Taking the easy path out. I didn't like Mamdani. I couldn't vote for him, and it was like it was either him or Sliwa or Cuomo, and I had to vote for Cuomo. It made me upset. But my point all I'm saying is like I think that it's easy to misinterpret what happened yesterday, and if Mamdani governs like he has a mandate, then I think he's in big trouble. Because when you win 50% of the vote, 51% of the vote one of the most democratic states and cities in the country, you don't have a mandate. Okay, you just don't. And I think he needs to realize that. He needs to trim his sails a little bit. He won't. I don't think he will because his supporters don't want that. I want to answer some of the questions we got here. Giada says free pre-K worked. It did work great. Why did it work great? In part because they got buy-in from the state, from Albany, and in part because it had been a program that had been talked about for years and had some success, I think, in pilot programs before it actually was implemented. But there was a lot of buy-in across the city on that particular program.
And
Uh,
and let me
yeah,
just throw one point out there. You know who else supports free pre-K? Joe Manchin. It's not an ideologically left thing.
it's not. It's true. Free buses and free bodegas are. And by the way, for the record, in New York City these days, um, they don't even. There are people who do take advantage of free buses. They just don't pay. And one of the problems we've had in New York City, I think, over the past couple of years, is that people jump turnstiles. They don't get arrested. They don't get I need arrested. They don't get cited for that. People don't pay on buses. Bus drivers are instructed not to give people to tell people they have to pay. Um, that's actually a bigger problem in New York, frankly, than free buses. People who don't want to pay for buses are already doing that. Um, no groups were experiencing severe oppression under Eric Adams. I live here, and I feel comfortable in saying that, Giadi. That wasn't something that was happening. And you're right. Many cities in Europe have free buses, but
But let's take 20 seconds to dive into why free, people jumping turnstiles is a problem. Forget for a second that people see that as, hey, if they can get away with breaking the law, I can, or unfairness. It's that mass transit is already underfunded in America. It's already, and this is everywhere. This is the metro in DC. This is SEPTA in Philadelphia. There's not enough money, and they have to keep cutting routes, and they have to keep cutting the number of trains and buses and things. And when you don't pay for that, unless you've got a lot of state money coming in, and it has to come from the state level because of the costs, you are going to strip the system of that much more money. And it's also a safety issue because where does some of that money come from? Like
yeah,
safety budgets and things. And we're having a problem here with our trains catching on fire, and that's not something that's good.
yeah. No, I agree with all of that. And look, again, I want to get to the question that Harold Bloomfield asked because I think it's a good pivot point. But I want to say, Mamdani, look again. I didn't vote for him. I'm very skeptical of him. I hope he succeeds. I hope that he surprises me. I hope that he is um, more empathetic toward New York City Jews than he's been up to this point. And he does isn't just rhetoric, but he actually follows through with actions. But I will believe it when I see it. And, I don't feel very optimistic after watching his campaign. And I am concerned about how effectively he can govern. I want to just pick up on the point that Harold asked because it's something we wanted to talk about. He says, how do you think GOP senators and House members will respond to Trump's urging to go scorched earth with extreme policies in response to last night's results? So, this is one of the more interesting elements of what happened last night because it absolutely colors the debate in Washington right now over the shutdown, which has now gone the longest government shutdown in American history. So yesterday afternoon, there was a a Senate Democratic caucus meeting in which the readout from political reporters was that Democrats were looking for an exit ramp to end the shutdown. And one thing that was being talked about was ending the shutdown in return for a standalone vote in the Senate on extending Obamacare subsidies, a vote that probably would not have passed. That I would suspect is now DOA, that proposal. Because after last night, Democrats look at those results and they're going to say, why the hell are we caving? We just won this election. We paid no price for the shutdown, including in a place where there are a ton of federal employees. This is on you guys. But to Republicans, you need to fix it. And that is what I suspect is going to happen. Now, two things I think are possible. The House Republicans cave, though I doubt that's going to occur, or Donald Trump caves. That is much more likely to occur. And if you read his tweet last night, he, of course, in indomitable Donald Trump sociopathic style, refused to take any responsibility for what happened and instead blamed this on the shutdown, which I mean, and indirectly sort of, I think, blamed Republicans, the House Republicans, special Republicans. So I suspect that Trump is going to want to get a deal to get this resolved sooner rather than later, which I think gives Democrats an opportunity. I'm going to tell you something right now. If Democrats end the shutdown by winning on the a healthcare issue, by getting the subsidies in Obamacare extended, boy, that is combine that with the results yesterday. That is a huge boost in the arms of the Democratic Party. Huge
M-
boost. And that's why.
Michael,
Go ahead.
I'm sitting here laughing because apparently a few minutes ago in Miami, Trump said, quote, "These are the things you have to talk about. If people don't talk about them, then you can do not so well in elections." And he's talking about economic achievements. And I'm laughing because where has he been the last few weeks?
I know, right?
Focused on abroad and foreign policy,
And building a
um,
friggin'
and,
ballroom
and building a ballroom.
and
So
having a great Gatsby party on Halloween while cutting off food stamp benefits. Jesus,
That's right.
what an
And
asshole.
then yesterday's True Social post on the food stamps that was frankly just cold-hearted about
Yes.
cutting them off and things like that. But so my thought on the shutdown out of this is I think that for them to do a deal. I'm less worried about a Senate vote passing than I am about a Senate vote passing that Mike Johnson won't put on the floor.
That's true.
Okay.
That's true.
I think what Democrats have to get one of three things out of a deal. They need to get John Thune to commit to tying whatever deal they get on ACA subsidies to government funding legislation,
Yeah,
bracing the House, jamming the House. Okay. Or they need to get commitment from 5 or 6 or 7 House Republicans to sign a discharge petition to force it onto the floor
that
and
won't happen.
get get a vote. It probably won't. Although Brian Fitzpatrick from Bucks County in Pennsylvania would be very wise to
He'd be
sign on to
very
that if
wise
the
to do that because he
results.
might be in trouble.
And he or no, it was Don Bacon and somebody else had a bipartisan 2-year extension bill. So there is some bipartisan discussion in the House. Um, so they have to get some sort of guarantee that what they're going to get is not a showboat, that what they're going to get has some chance of passing, and that the House is not going to be an impediment. So I think they have to get that. They have to get the Susan Collins preferred date on the next continuing resolution, which is December 19th. The conservatives want it into 2026, and that can't be. There needs to be another leverage point quickly coming up for Democrats, and they also have to get Thune to be willing to attach. This is going to get down the weeds. I apologize for this, but they have to be willing to attach some of the Senate bipartisan full year funding bills to the CR, which is going to force the House to take those bills.
Yeah.
And one of the three bills that's already been
CR
voted
meaning
on,
continuing resolution, which is what funds the
continuing
book.
resolution, which is the current, which is the temporary funding. And the reason that's important is one of the three bills that the Senate has already passed is the agriculture appropriations bill, which for God knows the arcane reasons. I could get into it, but it's not worth it. Includes food stamp funding. And it is very important, and they need to jam the House on this. Can't have Mike Johnson saying, "Well, we got to go to a conference committee." No, the House has disqualified itself from having any say in anything by the fact that they haven't worked since July 4th.
Right.
They've basically been on one perpetual vacation. They haven't been in session now since September 19th. Okay. And that's the key to me is making sure the House actually votes for something. But this could be about as good of an outcome as Democrats are going to get. And I do think that the Trump administration is about to do some stuff that could backfire if they don't get a deal this week, like shutting down part of U.S. airspace. Because what
Yeah,
and
Sean Duffy floated that yesterday, didn't he?
yeah, I saw
Can you
Jake
imagine if
Tapper.
he did they did that?
That's going to blow up on them. I
Well,
mean,
don't you think that was meant as a threat to Democrats, like a ham-handed
oh,
threat to Democrats?
that's intended to be a threat to Democrats. But what people don't seem to get, I saw Jake Tapper on CNN last night saying that, well, Democrats have won the messaging war on this, and it's not really fair. No, Jake, they didn't win the messaging war on this. You know what actually happened? Americans don't pay attention to government. They don't understand things. You know what my new data point is, Michael? Did you see the Kentucky thing yesterday? The Kentucky Secretary of State, who's a Republican, had to tweet to say that all the people calling his office worried that their polling places were not open, that there was one simple reason for that. There was no election in Kentucky yesterday. None. Nothing on the ballot. He said you can't vote for Virginia governor or New York City mayor in Kentucky. This is indicative. And George Conway said, maybe we were not cut out for democracy. But what I take this to mean is people are tuned out. They have no fucking clue what
Okay,
is happening with government.
can I
I,
make okay, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't cut you
I
off.
just
Go
want
ahead.
to finish the thought, which is that all they know is that Republicans control everything. So they're blaming them for the shutdown because they don't know what the filibuster is. They don't understand this procedural
Actually,
stuff.
I make it even simpler. I'd say they don't like Trump, so they're blaming Trump for it.
Right. He's in charge. We, for better or worse, blame presidents for everything, even the stuff they don't influence.
Yeah, one thing I want to point out, first of all, just want to say Bill Hartzell, who is a paid subscriber to Truth and Consequences, be like Bill, by the way.
Yeah.
Become a paid subscriber to Truth
Paid
and
subscriber
Consequences.
for both of us, please.
Also, become a paid subscriber to The World According to Brian. He said Trump trying to claim his narrow victory was a mandate. How did that work out? It's a great point. It didn't work out.
Yeah.
You saw how it worked out last night. It worked out really friggin' badly. But I want to pick up on the point that you just made. I wrote a piece about this earlier in the week about this deciding to win argument and how Democrats need to moderate their policies and
Oh, did you see my tweet about this last night? I
no.
said the Kentucky thing was the best piece of evidence for you that anyone could possibly have handed you.
Oh, thank you. Right. Look, I I've mentioned this before that the single best book that I've read on modern American politics is called Democracy for Realists by Christopher Auchen and Larry Bartels.
Bartell.
And it basically argues that Americans are not very bright when it comes to civic education. They don't know how their government works. They don't understand politics. And what is so stunning to me about these arguments about Democrats need to moderate and be less liberal is that there is so much political science research that points out that that voters simply don't understand what the words liberal and conservative mean. They don't know what's a liberal policy. They don't know what is a conservative policy. Moreover, voters often hold liberal views and conservative views together, even if they are a partisan Democrat or a partisan Republican. One thing I was thinking about, I don't know Simon Bazelon. He was the author of Deciding to Win. We should have him on, by the way, one of these things if he would do it.
Yeah.
I feel like that guy needs to talk to more voters. Because if you talk to voters, and I did a lot of this in 2016, a lot of this less of in 2020, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, you talk to voters and you realize, because I'm talking about people who go to political rallies. Okay, that's who I'm talking about, people that I was speaking to. The level of knowledge about politics, about policy, about government is astonishingly poor. It is so low, it will make you uncomfortable. People don't know anything about how politics works. I'm exaggerating, but not really. And so the idea that people can accurately figure out what as a liberal policy or a conservative policy just misunderstands that. And I would make the argument that people thought that, for example, Kamala Harris was too liberal because liberal is a stand in epithet for a Democrat they don't like. Right? It's an epithet. It isn't even it's more epithet than actual word with real meaning behind it. And so, that she was unpopular, people thought she was too liberal. That's probably the best explanation for why people thought she was too liberal, because she wasn't, they weren't gonna vote for her. People thought Joe Biden was much less liberal. Arguably, he ran on a very similar platform to what Kamala Harris ran on. Actually, arguably, Kamala Harris ran on a more conservative platform than Joe Biden did. But they don't make those kind of distinctions because they liked Biden, they voted for Biden. So, I just can't make this point enough. I just, the Kentucky thing is a good example of this. People most Americans are so tuned out to the things that you and I and everyone on this chat talk about and think about in politics, okay? Which is why somebody like Mikey Sherrill, who might look like a person they know, who might look like a person they work with, who seems like a normal person who's got 4 kids, is the kind of person you're gonna vote for over somebody like Graham Plattner, who is not, for example. I know he's a oyster fisherman who has a Nazi tattoo on his chest, or he used to have not tattoo on his chest. I'm just saying, like, you have to approach politics with understanding that most Americans have no idea what's going on in politics or policy
Yeah,
or government.
my favorite part of that Atkins and Bartell book is they've got evidence in there that as abortion started to stratify between the parties, where the pro-choice people, Democrats became the pro-choice party, Republicans became the anti-choice party or the pro-life party, because people forget that in the 70s, a lot of very liberal Democrats like Hubert Humphrey and Ted Kennedy were pro-life.
That's right.
Um, but what their data shows is that women changed parties over that issue and men just flipped their position because they cared more about their party identity than issues. But the best evidence for what Michael's saying is conservative states have for years been passing very liberal ballot measures, which is to say that people who are voting for Donald Trump are voting for things like, hey, let's increase the minimum wage. Hey, let's enshrine reproductive rights in our Constitution. Hey, let's, pass, you name the ballot initiative. They're passing this kind of stuff. And they do have these heretical views where they're liberal on some issues, they're conservative on other issues. And the thing I would use, the term I would use that where I think that Bazelon is maybe onto something a little bit, and I only think it matters at the margins, is what I'd call common sense. It's not about liberalism. It's about things like plastic straw bans that annoy people when they go to get coffee and their straw is disintegrating. It's about doing away with tracking in local classrooms so that people feel like their kids aren't getting the best education. It's stuff that relates to their lives. It's largely local. It's the story of somebody on television that they see on the local news who has a rap sheet as long as their arm, who shouldn't be on the street, who is committing violent crime. It's that stuff. It's not the federal politicians advocating for something. And to build off your Harris point, one concern I have about Newsom or J.B. Pritzker is some of it is just geographically coded. California is a left place, so Kamala Harris is from California, therefore she's probably too liberal. It's the way Michael Dukakis got slimed, even though he was a moderate. Is because he came from Massachusetts. It's one reason I'm drawn towards politicians from swing states. It's a lot harder to call your Arizona or your Pennsylvania, Democrat a flaming leftist.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, and I just think that, this moderate liberal debate is just, I think, is just it gives voters way too much credit, bottom line, and, gives them too much credit, this isn't, I mean, I hate to be crapping on voters and the electorate, but the facts are the facts. Most Americans just do not know a lot about how their government operates, and they don't understand what these words mean, liberal and conservative, the way that you and I associate with them.
No, they
Um,
just don't have the time. They're busy. They're overwhelmed by life. And I think it's actually something we don't talk about enough is the advent of email that destroyed work-life balance. When you add that to the more dual parent working families, leaves people with less and less time to care. No, Michael Dukakis was a bad candidate, Randall. He had the charisma of a brick wall.
he
And
was a
in
bad
fact,
candidate.
he gave the single worst debate answer in human history, I think.
But you know
Um,
why he lost, though? He lost
well,
because the economy was in good shape and the fundamentals favored Bush, and that's why Bush won. I mean,
right,
look,
and then Bush won at the margins because Roger Ailes and Lee Atwater ran one of the dirtiest campaigns in history, and that helped them at the margins. But the fact was, it was always going to be a hard lift, given that the only thing that was going against Bush was the three-term
The
penalty,
three-term thing, three-term
and the
penalty.
fact that Americans didn't really like George Herbert Walker Bush much. There's
Right.
a great book, Robert Fleegler, Brutal Campaign, came out a year or two ago, is on the '88 election. Very, very good book. If you're interested in
Oh, I
that
should read
more,
that. Yeah, that's interesting. No, I
he's a
mean,
good historian.
but I don't. I think a better candidate might have narrowed the gap in '88, but I'm not sure would have won. Maybe Gary
Yeah,
Hart. Maybe I don't know. You lose by 10 points. It's kind of hard to argue that it was the candidate alone.
right.
So I, you know, I and I th- so I, in general, I mean, I think I would hope, and it won't happen, of course, that what happened last night would sort of would chill the or it's not going to end the debate about this moderate question, but it really should. I mean, I think what you saw last night, and this is the crucial point, is this wasn't about moderate or conservative or liberal. It was about are you Trump or are you not Trump? And this is the bottom line for Democrats. You saw this in 2018. You saw it to some extent in 2020. You saw it definitely in 2022. That there is a healthy part of the electorate that does not like Donald Trump. It is the majority electorate. He is incredibly unpopular. We've been talking about this point every week. We do this thing. We talk about. I started off last week talking about it. He's unpopular. That's the biggest variable in American politics. That's what's driving the outcomes we saw last night.
And
That's
it's
what's
getting worse.
it's getting
We got a
worse.
whole run of new polling this week that was the worst he's seen in some cases in both terms.
Hey, Randall, I got to push back a little bit on that point. Democrats chose very well in '92 with Bill Clinton. Although Bill Clinton, by the way, another example of what I'm talking about here. Bill Clinton is praised because he moved Democrats more to the center. That's not why he won. Okay? He won. He beat George H.W. Bush by 5 points. You know why? Because George H.W.'s approval rating was in the 30s. Because there was a goddamn recession in the country. That's why he won. And then he won re-election because his opponent was Bob Dole, who was a terrible candidate. And also, the economy was in good shape. That's
And
why he won. He's a
let's
good
also,
politician. Don't get me wrong, but the fundamentals favored him.
uh,
I'd also say Al Gore was a terrible candidate. Sorry, he was. I think John Kerry was an excellent candidate, ran an excellent campaign.
I disagree on that
Probably,
one.
yeah, you disagree. Probably the person who was the most likely I don't think any Democrat would have done as well as John Kerry did in that election. Okay, and in fact, I'll point this out, he was the narrowest reelection victory by an incumbent president since 1916. That's in part because John Kerry ran a better campaign than George H.W. Bush. Um, Carter was not a good candidate. And he was. I actually was been researching a lot of the '76 campaign. I've been thinking very something longer about it, and he was not a very good candidate. And he was lucky to get elected that year. Sorry, and
So
he was a shitty president. He really
I
was.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I just want to point out that both Carter and Bill Clinton were incredibly lucky as well. Bill Clinton was only the nominee because in 1991, George H.W. Bush had approval ratings off the charts
100%.
high, and the best possible Democratic candidates wouldn't run. And that left Bill Clinton the best in a pretty weak field. That
Absolutely. Do you remember who his key opponent was in the 1992 campaign? Do you
we're
remember?
talking about Paul Tsongas or
Paul
Tom Harkin.
Tsongas.
Yeah,
Paul Tsongas.
yeah. I mean, and in '76, I think Carter got very lucky that Frank Church was tied down with the Church Commission.
Oh no no
Um,
no 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 no. He ran a brilliant primary campaign.
He did.
He
No,
ran a
he was the
brilliant
first guy to
primary campaign.
understand the value that Amber Rossner wrote a book on his ability to set the media message and the tone of the campaign. And what he realized is that Iowa was newly important in the newly democratized
It's true.
nomination process, and that he could start a snowball of media attention by winning Iowa. And it was a big field. And the other crucial mistake his opponents made was they kind of coalesced around him in Florida, which was like the third primary because they wanted to kill George Wallace's primary
Right.
or his chances. And so they saw Carter as the other Southern governor, and that created this snowball between Iowa and Florida, where he ended up winning. And then people forget he was 30 points up on Jerry Ford and almost lost.
Almost lost. In
Um,
fact,
a-
look,
a-
my argument, and I want to write something about this. My argument always has been, I wrote this in my '68 book, is that the best thing that happened to Democrats is that they lost '76 election. Winning that election
I
was a
was about to say this. My
disaster for them.
my favorite counterfactual in political history, and again, this is what I do for a living, is that I think if Jerry Ford wins was like 15,000 votes in Ohio and Hawaii, which shows you how different the map was.
It was Mississippi and Ohio.
Okay, Mississippi and Ohio, Hawaii, whatever it was, if he wins, I think Ted Kennedy wins in 1980.
Yeah. There's no
And
Reagan.
Ronald Reagan is never president.
Never president. There's no
And I
Reagan
bet,
revolution. No
right, right,
considered
right.
revolution.
No, I think the next guy up in 84 probably would have been H.W. Bush or Dole, somebody like that, who was much more moderate or establishment-y.
It's so funny here you
Um,
say this because I've been developing this counterfactual project on counterfactual elections, and I mean, my big one I focus on is 68 because I wrote a book about it and Bobby Kennedy, but my second big one is 76, and I think it's the most underappreciated counterfactual in modern American history because Ford almost won. He probably should have won. He was a slightly better campaigner and a better nominee, and he hadn't pardoned Nixon. And it would have been so much better for Democrats if Ford wins. All the things that happened that are bad in the late '70s are basically are adhered to the Republican Party, not Democratic Party.
and that would have
So
been or three straight terms too
yeah,
for Republicans.
exactly.
So they really would have owned it. The other fun counterfactual in the 76 election is what happens if Ford wins the North Carolina primary? Does Reagan ever take off as a political figure, beyond where he was? Because that would have ended his campaign after like five primaries.
Yeah, people don't remember this. That's a great point. Actually, that's a really good. I hadn't thought about that. It's a great point that in '76, Reagan started off really poorly and won North Carolina, but kind of on a lark because Ford didn't really compete too heavily there.
And Jesse
And
Helms's people took over
Jesse
Reagan's
Helms,
campaign,
exactly. That's right.
and
That's right.
they focused mostly on the Panama Canal,
That's right. That's
as a
right.
jingoistic kind of thing. And he wins by like 2 or 3 points, and that reignites Reagan's whole primary campaign. They go all the way to the convention in Kansas City, and the Ford people throw them the platform. And then what ends up happening is Ford brings Reagan down after his acceptance speech, brings him down to the podium, and Reagan outshines him because he's an actor, gives a better speech, and people have buyer's remorse. And that sort of cements Reagan as the favorite for 1980.
Well, Reagan also screwed up because he gave the VP position to Richard Schweikert, who was a moderate, and it pissed off all the
That's right.
conservatives. But in general, like
Pennsylvania. Yeah.
that's a great counterfactual to consider because I do think, again, if Republicans win that election in '76, we are living in a very different country today, much more democratic country if that happens. The Reagan Revolution and all of the sort of good times of the '80s do not happen. And although I don't know who the Democratic nominee would have been in '80, maybe Ted Kennedy, although I've
I
never not convinced of that one.
I think it would have been Ted Kennedy, just because he still had the Kennedy name behind him. And once he figured out his message after the disastrous Roger Mudd interview early in his campaign, he turned out to run a pretty good primary campaign later
Yeah.
on. So I tend to think it would have been him. The moderate wing of the party didn't really have a standard bearer at that point, beyond Carter, but Carter was an abysmal president. He did all kinds of damage to the Democratic brand. And I don't get me wrong, I think the degree of difficulty facing any president in that period was going to be really high. Whoever was in office was going to lose in 80, which is part of the counterfactual. But I think
Oh, I
Carter
don't think
was
that's
abysmal.
I don't agree with that at all, actually. I think if, Carter, for example, rescues the hostages in Iran, I think he probably gets reelected. I
Well,
think if he's not as stubborn with, congressional Democrats as he was, he probably gets elected. I think you have to people forget this now. In 1980, the Friday before the election, the polls were basically tied, and that's when they had the last debate, and Reagan
the
basically
only debate,
the only debate.
and it
Reagan
was
did
a
very
week
well
before
in
the
the
election.
debate, and the poll shifted almost overnight. Um, so I do think that was a win. I think 80, as unpopular as Carter was, he was tied with Reagan going into the last weekend, and he could have won that election.
I
But I want to make the point about Jimmy Carter is a really good man. He was an awful
awful
president.
president.
Awful. He was bad on so many levels. It's almost hard to calibrate it. He was arrogant. He was condescending to Senate Democrats, congressional Democrats. He thought he was smarter than everybody else, and he was just bad at politics. And by the way, that is the best example I can come up with for why you do not elect political nobodies. And Carter, I mean, look, you could compare him to Clinton, who was I think a
No,
better
no,
president,
you can't, because Clinton had been like four-term governor
four-term
versus
governor.
one-term. Like he had lost a race and bounced back, which is incredibly hard to do. And I teach a seminar on the rise of conservatism every spring at Penn, and um, I read for my students speeches. I don't tell them who gave them for the week I do on Carter, and it's Jimmy Carter, like one of his State of the Unions versus Ronald Reagan's the speech announcing Reagan's campaign. I'm like, which one sounds more likable? Which one is better? And
Yeah.
it's Reagan. Reagan is saying to people, no, your standard of living doesn't have to slip. Carter's saying, put a fucking sweater on. Like Carter is saying, we're gonna have to learn to do more with less. You're gonna have to learn to live with a lower standard of living. It's the worst political
So
antenna I've ever seen.
can I tell you funny about that? It's funny you bring that up. I used to work for Stu Eisenstadt, who was Carter's domestic policy advisor.
Who loves to try to like rehabilitate him. I'm looking at his book
He
over there.
totally does. But one point he made to me one was that like he completely the famous Malay speech that Carter gave, in which he basically like this sort of like we were to say to Malays and we need to sort of fix what's happening in
Yeah.
the country. Um, he was completely opposed to it. That was a terrible idea. But once they gave it, Carter's poll numbers went up dramatically. Like he actually got a huge boost from that speech. The problem was like 3 days
He then
later,
fired all of his cabinet.
he asked for resignations for all of his cabinet secretaries, and like the polls plummeted like overnight. It was like disastrous. I want to get to this question though, Randall. You asked, did debate flops make a difference? Did Ford's comment about Soviet domination in Eastern Europe cause them to lose? Look, when you lose by like 15,000 votes in two states, you can point to lots of different factors. I mean, the debate flub probably hurt his momentum a little bit. So I think it probably
It
reminded
also
people.
fueled the Chevy Chase
Exactly. That's what I was
impersonation
about
that
to
was
say. Yeah.
devastating. Yeah.
It fueled the argument that Ford was clueless and was not too bright. So maybe, I mean, you could say that that cost him, but I don't think that you could say that was the singular reason because you can point to lots of reasons why he lost. I mean, again, it's such a small margin. I would say about 2,000. I mean, Gore lost by 500 votes in Florida. There were so many close elections across the country. He lost, I think
Literally,
it was New Hampshire by a few thousand votes. I mean,
it's the only time that you can point to the choice of a running mate and say if he had put Bob Graham or Gene Shaheen on the ticket, Al Gore
probably would have won.
wins.
Not
I
Shaheen.
mean,
Not Shaheen. She wasn't prominent then, was she?
she was governor of New Hampshire.
She was at the time?
Yeah, yeah, she
No, I
was
didn't know that.
governor of New Hampshire.
Graham's the better argument because
Better example,
if
but
Graham's on,
like
hey, but if the Palm Beach ballot people don't screw up the butterfly
ballot,
ballot,
the
he
butterfly
probably
ban.
wins there.
I mean, there are tons of these things, and just to finish the arc on Carter, the Malay speech was actually popular, but I love to show my students all of these things where he says the government can't solve our problems,
Yeah,
and he basically undermines the entire pillar of Franklin Roosevelt's Democratic Party, which is we can help make your life better. Meanwhile, the Republicans have finally figured out not to be the Scrooge Party, and Dick Worthland's polls for Ronald Reagan show him the tax cuts are an incredibly strong argument because he's saying, I'm going to help you. I'm going to put more
right.
money in your pocket. And so Republicans hit on that at the same time that Carter is saying, well, you got to make do with less, and we can't solve your problems for you. And he was just the worst politician that you could ever
You know, it's
conceive of.
it's funny about Carter that he's seen now as a liberal when he basically ran as a moderate New
I
Democrat.
ran a piece last year by a guy at Cato when Carter died that argued he was the most successful conservative president of the modern conservative era, talking about his deregulation and less
Yeah,
government and all this. He was a conservative. Paul Matzko is the scholar's name if you want to look it up. But
not about
Carter
arguments.
was just an awful president from a Democratic standpoint, um, and really did huge damage to the party. And but just to build off of that debate answer that you gave, because a lot of the argument of what's going on now about moderation versus leftists is about structuralism versus campaigns versus candidates. How much is baked in with polarization and economic factors where it doesn't matter who you run. The fact is, in close elections, that stuff matters at the margins. So, like Michael Dukakis didn't lose because of his debate flub. And for those of you who don't know it, Bernard Shaw from CNN asked him, um, if somebody rapes and murders your wife, would you like want the death penalty or want
Because he was
retribution?
opposed to death penalty.
Opposed to the death penalty. And he gives this dry technocratic policy answer about why the death penalty is a bad thing. And everybody watching their TVs is thinking, you fool, I would want to strangle the person myself, Like they're looking for an emotional answer. And he walked off the stage and said to Susan Estrich, his campaign manager, I just lost this, didn't I? He knew
He
it
didn't
was a
lose it because of that, though.
no, but like he knew it, but like that wasn't the difference. Whereas Al Gore, the size and the eye rolls in
He didn't lose because of that
2000,
either. He didn't lose
no,
it.
No, no, but I'm saying it's a lot more possible because 500 voters, like you
Oh,
flip
yeah, yeah.
250 votes in Florida, that's a lot more possible,
Yeah, but,
right?
like, it could have rained in a certain part of Florida and kept
Right.
Democrats home, right? There's
Well,
you can go with any
there
possible
is
explanation.
political science evidence from 1980 that the Jimmy Carter's concession cost the Democrats out west because the polls weren't
That's
closed and
right.
somebody like Frank Church would have won. There's evidence that when it rains, it tends to have an impact on the election. In fact, there was a Republican who got quoted in Politico last month in those Georgia Public Service Commission races that we talked about at the beginning, who said, I don't just want it to rain in Atlanta, I want it to hail in Atlanta on election day because they had municipal elections in Atlanta yesterday and he understood that if people turned out in Atlanta, he had a problem. So, all of this kind of stuff matters in close elections. That's the thing. You never know which election is going to be that 500 vote election or that, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Marionette Miller Meeks, the accidental congresswoman from Iowa, who I think is going to be gone after next year, won last year by 760 votes, I think, or 720 votes, and she won her first race in 2020 by 6 votes.
Yeah.
In a campaign like that, everything matters. In a campaign decided by 10 points, nothing matters.
So I think one
Um,
thing you should take away from this conversation if you're listening is that people like Brian and I are obsessed with campaigns. We love campaigns. We love the minutiae of campaign, which means that for us and for a lot of people like us who also are obsessed with these this minutiae of campaigns, we tend to overstate the importance of campaign effects and overstate the importance of what happens in a campaign. The reality is that campaigns don't matter all that much. Campaigns do matter along the margins, at least on the presidential level. It's a little different on state and gubernatorial races and House races. A little
it
different
matters a lot more as you go down the
as you go
ballot.
down ballot.
When you give
But
it to a state rep race where it's decided by 20 votes or something, yeah, it matters a lot.
right. But on presidential, it doesn't matter all that much. In part because, first of all, 85 to 90% of the electorate is going to vote for the same candidate of the same party every single year and isn't going to change. And so usually it's like a small percentage of the electorate that changes. And those are the people who pay the least attention to politics. And so they're the least likely to be affected by campaign effects. So what I'm getting at here is that this is why this whole moderating to win argument is, I think, so silly is it overstates the importance of campaigning. Campaigning doesn't really matter all that much. Again, it matters lower ballot. Yes, it make a difference. Campaign effects can make a difference. Things like in Georgia, Herschel Walker losing, he lost in part because, he's a nut job and he's a terrible
Right.
candidate and he wasn't coherent.
And, and,
And
and by the way, I would say we're not saying to you like there is a minimum bar for a campaign and for a candidate that you have to clear for all of this to be true.
yeah,
If you
that's
are
right.
Kerry Lake or Herschel Walker or you raise $0 for your campaign, that is going to have an effect, right? You don't want that's why you don't want to nominate the scandal tarred person. As we said, Jay Jones won by 6, Abigail Spanberger won by almost 15 like that candidates do matter. But but if you nominate someone who is not I mean, I always go back to the old Edwin Edwards line, like to say that to lose, I'd have to get caught with a
A live
uh,
boy or a dead girl.
dead girl, live boy or dead girl. Like as long as you don't nominate somebody like that or Herschel Walker, the campaigns there's a limit as to how much they matter.
Can I just say, like, the best example of this in recent memory is Alabama, where Roy Moore, who
More
basically was like a pedophile and who got kicked out of malls in the
and,
70s because he
and
was wait,
let's be
let me just
honest,
point. Hold on. And he lost to Doug Jones. Look, the Doug Jones lost Tommy Tuberville, who is one of the
the
stupidest
dumbest
human
man.
beings I've ever seen in politics. Who the fact that he can walk upright is like miraculous, and he's about to become governor of Alabama. I
Oh,
mean,
Jesus.
I truly, Alabama receives the government representation that it deserves. And so, but that's my point. Like Tuberville's an idiot, but he's an idiot who's like, he's not extreme idiot in the context of Alabama politics. But Roy Moore, because he's as I said, I love saying this, he was basically banned from malls because he was hitting on young girls there. Like that's a bridge too far for Alabama voters, which is why he lost. Tommy Tuberville, didn't get kicked out of a mall, isn't a pedophile, doesn't hit on young girls,
He
and
was
so
just
he
a
ends up
rotten football coach.
shitty football coach. Not Alabama. If he was, I don't think he would have won. But I just think it's really a point that like that this I think it's you have to keep this in mind that you have to be a really, really, really bad candidate for campaign effects to matter. And Roy Moore was a really, really bad candidate, just like Herschel Walker was a bad candidate, just like well, in Pennsylvania, Doug Mastriano losing by double
Uh,
digits when Oz, almost beat. Well, you lost by 5 points, I think, to Fetterman. Like you have to be really bad to really get blown out or have campaign effects matter.
don't
And
forget Carrie Lake, who last night was saying it was 5 years ago tonight that Brett Baer called the stolen election in Arizona, still leaning in after she's been repudiated repeatedly by voters. Like,
by the way, this is something else. Deciding to win, people were like praising Ruben Gallego for last a great campaign. I'm like, I could fucking win a campaign running against Carrie Lake in Arizona. She is a nut job. And like, this was her second time running after she lost the first time in a winnable race. No, no, it was her second time running. Yeah, she lost to Carrie Hobbs the first time. Gary
Katie
Dobbs.
Hobbs.
Katie Hobbs. She lost the first time to her, and then oh, by the way, never accepting that she lost the race and sued for months after, saying that she had won, like Trump did in 2020. And that's why she lost. I mean, you can't separate Gallego's victory from the fact that he ran against a complete, crazy person.
Yeah, and I mean, okay, you actually raised a good point. One election last night that signaled Republicans still don't get it. Mesa City Council recall or something like that, Mesa, Arizona. The moderate Republican seems, I haven't looked today, but as of last night, looked like she was going to be recalled. She just got reelected in July, and they got a recall on the ballot. And the Turning Point USA
Why?
candidate won last night, or looked like she was winning. Because the Turning Point people didn't like her.
Why? What did she do?
I don't remember what
Okay.
the sin was, but this was a more moderate, like McCain Republican, and Republicans in Arizona just keep losing because they keep thinking they can nominate Carrie Lakes, and the McCain Republicans are like, no, no, we'll just vote for the Democrats then.
Look, Arizona's a good example of, by the way, what happens when you nominate shitty candidates. I mean,
Yeah,
Carrie Lake has lost two statewide elections.
Blake
Lake
Masters.
Master, two, like 50% chance he's buried somebody in the desert. Is he lost? That guy is terrifying. If you don't know about Blake Masters, Google Blake Masters gun ad, where he runs an entire ad of him basically getting aroused about his like German pistol with a silencer on it that he fires in the desert. I mean, it is a terrifying ad. And then also, what's her name? The one who lost to Cinema and Kelly. Is it
Martha McSally.
Martha McSally? Is another
She's a
terrible
great
candidate.
example of someone who looks good on paper, Air Force officer, and they kept nominating her because she looked good on paper and was just terrible at
Right.
politics. The
But
the
like,
other one, like her, Kelly Loeffler, the administrator of the SBA now, who was appointed in Georgia, and they thought she was like they hit on this like great future star because she was the owner of their WNBA team, and
right,
she
right.
coded as like a suburban woman. And then in an actual campaign, she was abysmal. She kept putting her foot in her mouth.
Terrible.
You know,
But anyway, Arizona is a good example of what we're talking about here, as far as where Democrats keep winning in Arizona by nominating relatively, uncontroversial, somewhat moderate politicians like Mark Kelly, like Katie Hobbs, who is not the most exciting politician, even Ruben Gallego, who is, I think he's pretty dynamic and I like him, but he's sort of has a nice working class background. He's got a good sort of like, resume to being a senator. And, they had Kirsten Sinema, who was at the time still a pretty good candidate, and of course crashed and burned since then. But the Republicans keep nominating terrible candidates, and that's why they keep losing races. They frankly, if they had better candidates, they might actually win. Like the guy named was it Doug Ducey was the governor,
yeah.
and MAGA hates him, so he didn't run for the Senate race. If he runs for Senate against Gallego, he might win that race because don't forget Trump won Arizona by 5 points, 4.5 or 5 points he won by. It was a huge margin in Arizona. You know, for for a for for Trump to win by that large a margin and Gallego to still win by 3.5 points, it's the 8.5 point shift between Gallego and Trump. That just tells you how bad a candidate Carrie Lake was, how
Well,
bad she was that she trailed that far behind Trump.
that's something I want to bring up. That one reason that we're talking about Mamdani the way we were is like, for example, Georgia governor's race. It looks pretty good for Democrats after last night, but they've got a very contested primary, and there's a full panoply of ideological possibilities in that primary, and choosing wisely in the primary is going to determine how good of a chance they have of winning. I
Please
think if
tell me
Jeff
Stacey Abrams is not running again.
no, the more controversial-ish candidate is Keisha Lance Bottoms, who was the mayor of
Oh,
Atlanta,
mayor of
who
Atlanta.
did a lot of COVID shutdown stuff that the Republicans are salivating about tying to her.
And worked for
But
Biden
yeah, and worked for Biden.
in the
And
White House.
the more she's got a huge primary lead right now as of the poll this morning. But the most interesting guy who's only polling at 5% is Jeff Duncan, the former Republican lieutenant governor
Oh,
who
right,
renounced his party over January 6th. Like, I think he wins running away.
right.
Bottoms, she may win, but it could be a dicier situation if they could tie unpopular COVID stuff to her and unpopular Biden stuff to her. So it's just about nominating smartly, so to speak, and choosing wisely and not picking someone who has unique liabilities that the normal person does not. And by the way, we have not talked about it. I don't like talking about exit polls because they usually get revised later and then we usually get data that shows that they were all wrong. That being said, the exit polling last night showed that Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger did well with young men, really well.
Yeah,
So you
very
don't
well.
need to nominate Graham Plattner to win back the young men. Um, and that
I
whole
think
line of argument falls apart.
I think that's a really good point, and one that I think people need to pick up on is that, one of the reasons why, we heard this argument that Democrats were having problems with young voters. They won back in. I made this point a few days ago that this YouGov poll, which showed that Democrats with a 5 or 6 point lead in the congressional ballot, but they had a 27-point advantage among 18 to 29-year-olds. The any advantage. Look, young people voted for Trump because they're worried about the economy. Okay, that has completely faded in the basically since then. It's I mean he did not create support them. He basically won with them because people are said about the economy. That concern has been replaced by anger and about the way that he's governed, and I think partly because of the mass deportation stuff and other things as well. So all I'm saying here, and I think it's a good point. Maybe we can end up on here is that um, you know a lot of what we're seeing in American politics is the anti-incumbency. It's a response to who's in power. A lot of young people, a lot of minority voters were not happy with the economy. They weren't happy with Biden. They weren't happy with inflation. Some of them, I think, among male voters, didn't want to vote for a female president, and they chose Trump. And the response has been, to push back against Trump. And I made this point last night that the word of the day, or the phrase of the day, is thermostatic public opinion. And what happened? And this isn't just about that, by the way. But what happens is one party wins an election, they implement their agenda. And there's an immediate, like almost like a temperature when a temporal response, if you will, to what one party does from a policy standpoint, and that's what is happening. Combine that with the fact that Trump is not a likable figure, and people don't like the things that he's doing, and they don't like him. And you put all that together, and Democrats have the political wind at their back.
I call it political gravity. I have been
Sure.
I was all over National Journal this morning because they had their new Senate rankings, and they had Michigan fourth and Georgia second as most likely to flip. And
What was
I
most
said,
likely? North Carolina?
North Carolina. I was like, what are you guys even doing? I think New Hampshire was fifth. Like, what are you guys even doing after last night? And I've been sort of at odds with the race rankers because I'm a historian. I look at history, and midterms and off years don't go well for the president's party. The people who are most compelled to show up and vote are angry. They're the people who feel like they're being screwed by the administration,
Right.
who see awful things happening, and it happens to presidents in both parties. It happens to presidents who get reelected handily and to those who lose. It is just unless you have some sort of outside unusual factor that happens. This is what happens in every midterm election. You have a lot of Republican strategists trying to spin reporters now, saying, "Oh, this is going to be different. We're going to get the Trump voters out. There are not a lot of Republicans in seats that Harris won." All these arguments, and they're just ignoring reality. Political gravity is a thing, and we saw it last night, and we're going
Yeah.
to keep seeing it. Another great example this morning. I don't know if Michael saw this. Trump summoned the Republican senators to breakfast at 8:30 at the White House and spent a lot of his time fighting with them about getting rid of the filibuster. He got into an argument with his buddy Lindsey Graham that they'll settle during one of their 9 million rounds of golf over the weekend. But after that meeting, a lot of the Republican senators who had previously been opposed to doing something, getting rid of the filibuster, were singing a different tune because they're that afraid of Trump. One of them was John Cornyn, who is as institutionalist as you're ever going to find. And this gets to Larry's question about, is it possible to flip the Senate? you know, I feel like Cornyn looks like a Republican senator out of central casting. He's been in office a long time. He's a Republican establishment, like a Bush ally. And he's always said, the filibuster is non-negotiable. Well, this morning he said maybe we need a carve out for appropriations and government funding. Why? Because he is desperate for an endorsement from Donald Trump in a primary against Ken Paxton
Yeah,
and Wesley Hunt.
that's
And
right.
why is that? It's because, Ken Paxton is great in a primary. He is Kerry Lake in a general election.
Yep.
Texas might still be too Republican. But my attitude after last night, I don't know how Michael feels, is I'd up my chances of Democrats flipping the Senate to about 25 or 30%.
Oh,
And
no, no, no. I would go like 15 to 20%.
okay, that was where I was. But my thinking is this. I think the Farm Belt is getting uniquely hurt by Trump's economic program, and that's going to affect Iowa. And we've seen it in Iowa special elections all year. And I feel much better about Georgia after last night. And I think it probably, unless something dramatic happens, Michigan is not going to be competitive for the Republicans, no matter how much they try to make that happen.
I agree.
And, I look at Cornyn, he's clearly afraid of losing the primary. Now, this is a great example. Jasmine Crockett keeps flirting with the Senate run. And Jasmine Crockett has exactly the same chance of becoming senator from Texas as Michael and I have,
Yeah,
which is 0%. She's
0%.
great with a quip and a soundbite, but those are the kinds of sound bites that offend people.
Yeah.
She called the governor, Greg Abbott, who was paralyzed by a tree falling on him, Governor Hot Wheels. Well, that's just not very smart from a
Did you
political
I
standpoint.
forgot that she said that. That's
She
awful.
said that.
It's
Like, it's
awful.
awful, right? Like, if she runs and wins a primary, Democrats are not going to win Texas. And I also think that yesterday may help get Patola into the Alaska race. But the place where I think it matters the most is New Jersey and Virginia. We saw a swing of like 8.5 points or 9 points in Virginia. Saw a swing of 7 points in New Jersey. Why does that matter? Well, Sherrod Brown lost in Ohio by like what 3.4 points, 3.5
3 and a half
points.
points.
So it's not that outlandish to think that you would see a 3.5 point swing in Ohio. That would be a third seat of the four the Democrats need. It's still not likely, but it's more likely than it was before last night in
So
my
let
mind.
me say this. I maybe 20% I'll give them because I do think chances of winning North Carolina and Maine, assuming Mills is the nominee, are relatively strong. And I do think that if you look at the seats the Democrats are holding, I just don't see a lot of evidence that I mean, Georgia's the place where the most likely to flip, and I'm just not seeing I don't know. Ossoff's not running like a guy. He's running like a guy who feels somewhat. He's a great fundraiser, but like on the shutdown, for example, like he hasn't come out against the shutdown. Like I feel like he's strikes me as like relatively confident, and I don't see any Republican out there who's that good of a candidate who can beat him. Um,
No, it's the
so
clown brigade.
yeah, it's a
Another
clown brigade. So
bad
I
football
like
coach,
Ossoff's
Derek
chances, and I
Dooley.
don't really see she. I think New Hampshire leans. I think look if it's going to be a good night for Democrats next year. And I do think that if that's the case, that places that are bluish or purplish, like Michigan and New Hampshire, probably aren't going to flip. But, to win, Democrats, like I said, they need to win North Carolina and Maine. They need to win two more places. It's hard to see. You have to basically get lucky in Texas with Paxton being the nominee. I think there's no chance that Democrats win if Cornyn's nominee. Ohio, maybe Sherrod Brown can win, although th- maybe I don't know. I have to look at that race more closely and look at the Republican opponent. Patola has won statewide. I don't think Dan Sullivan, who's the current Republican senator who's up for reelection next year. I don't think he's that terribly popular. So maybe,
I think I
but
saw
outside of those
37,
places, I
50.
just maybe Iowa, depending
Yep,
on who the
yep.
nominees are, because we don't know who the nominees are going to be, and you could see a backlash to Trump's tariffs policies. So maybe, although
Well,
I suspect the Supreme Court's going to
well,
overturn his
that
ability
was the
to.
last thing I was going to get to. But to finish the Iowa thought, one thing I was thinking last night was the swing we saw in New Jersey and Virginia, while large, would not be enough in Texas or Iowa, which would be the most likely fourth seats, right? Like
But
I think
didn't Trump win Texas by like 5.5 points or something, or 6 points?
that was 2020. In
What
2024, it was like 13, I think.
was it that big in 20? Okay, all right,
I think Iowa got up to like 13. So you need some sort of unique effect in Iowa where the swing was even bigger. Either things have to get a lot worse for Trump than they already are, which is possible, or you have to have a unique effect in Iowa where because the farm stuff is happening and hurting them so much,
right.
that you see a bigger swing than we saw in either New Jersey or Virginia, almost double the swing. And then, or you need Ken Paxton to be that bad in Texas to get there. So it is still, not even close to 50-50, nowhere near that. Um, I do feel better about Brown after last night because he really does just need a 3.5 point swing. Although John Husted is probably a better candidate than Bernie Moreno was. But
Yeah, let me say one thing. I think that the best chance for Democrats is that they can win North Carolina and Maine, maybe pick up a third seat. Could be Texas, could be Ohio, could be Alaska, could be Iowa. That makes it 50-50. And then you go to 2028 and you win in North Carolina again. When, what's his name, is up for reelection. T Who's the North Carolina senator? I'm now blank.
Ted Budd, the
Ted
gun
Budd, thank
store
you.
owner,
Right, and
um,
when Bud's up, or maybe you win in,
Ron Johnson,
Wisconsin, where Ron
Wisconsin.
Johnson has been, like, basically, amazingly winning elections year after year when he shouldn't be. That's the best chance for Democrats, in my view, is that it's not all happening at once. And by the way, this argument that you hear from these pundit bros of like, "Oh, we have to be competitive in Arkansas and Louisiana," you're not gonna win there. You're just not gonna win there. Like, you can
No,
try. I
all
invite you
you
to
might
try.
do
You're not gonna
is
win.
divert money off
Yeah,
from the
there's so much
Republic.
money out
There's
there
so
for
much money, it
campaigns
doesn't
now.
matter
I
as
don't think that's a
much.
big issue.
The two things I would say that are more positive, I was struck by the fact that Claire McCaskill was on MS, and I guess it's MS Now or whatever
Yeah, MS now, yeah.
they're calling MSNBC, saying that she thought the Senate was now in play, and that struck me because she lost in a Democratic wave in 2018. So I thought that was kind of
I
interesting.
feel like politicians make the worst political analysts, generally speaking.
That's also possible that you just don't know what they're talking about half the time.
They really
I
don't.
mean, I do think that there's a chance that what happens that Iowa we see like a localized kind of wave because of the farm stuff, but there's also one other kind of quirky possibility out there, which is Mike Dunleavy. I think that's his name. The
The former coach for the Milwaukee
No,
Bucks.
the governor of Alaska, but I was also thinking the basketball coach or the son was an NBA
The son
player.
was an NBA player. I think he's a coach
Uh,
now, actually.
but I can't remember what the first name is, but it's Dunleavy, I think, is the
Ryan,
governor.
maybe.
I'm not sure offhand. The governor of Alaska has basically said he's running against Lisa Murkowski the next time. And because of the ranked choice thing, I do wonder whether if it got to 50-50, she'd talk to the Democrats about flipping. Because to beat a conservative Republican former governor, she's going to need to win all of the Democrats in
She just runs.
Alaska
What
and
if she's
all the
president? She runs an independent. That's what she's been doing.
well, but she caucuses with them. And, in
So
terms of control, well, but I'm just saying, like, if you're a Democrat who's already pissed at her for voting for the big, beautiful mess, it's not out of the realm of possibility if it gets to 50-50. It's not happening unless it would be that she could control the Senate. Um, but that's an outside possibility as well. The other thing that I will say about the Senate, and I hate to sound like Ben Crenshaw before the 1999 Ryder Cup the last night, where he said, I have a feeling, wagging his finger at the press, and proved to be right. But sometimes I still back to 2006, where at this point in the cycle, and there's some reason to think that we are in a 2004, 2006 moment here, where what we just saw was like 2004, and we're going to see 2006 coming up. At this point in the cycle, I don't really think anyone thought Democrats could win the Senate. No one thought George Allen was losing it in Virginia. They thought George Allen was the next Republican nominee for president. That's how people talked about him. And it turned out they were able to win Missouri. It turned out that they were able to win Virginia, and they won the Senate. So
yeah,
I,
I'm gonna push back on that, man. I'm sorry. That was 20 years ago. We live in a different political environment right now.
you're right.
I'm just gonna remind you what happened in 2018, man. 2018, Democrats went
No,
popular vote in the House by like what 10 points. They
right,
lost seats in the Senate.
right,
It
right,
is.
right. Look, that's why I say don't more than like 25, 30%. I'm just saying that for a long time, all the toss-up Senate races broke in one direction, and
uh,
we saw it cycle after cycle. But you're right. I am less convinced of that because remember, the last time this set of seats was on the ballot was 2020. Democrats dramatically out fundraised Republicans across the map, and they lost in Iowa. They
Across the
lost in
board.
Alaska. They lost, all
South
of these
Carolina, they
places.
lost in
Right,
North Carolina. They
right,
lost in a lot of
eh,
places where they were running close
right.
for most of these elections.
Right. So I don't. I think anyone who says the Democrats have a really good chance of taking the Senate is smoking something. I would like to share in their happy drugs.
This is why I said 20%. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna I'm gonna wiggle around on this one. I'm gonna go 15-20% until I see some polling that suggests Brown has a chance, until I see that Potola is getting in the race, unless it's clear that Paxton's going to beat Cornyn, and I get a better sense of I don't even know who's running in Iowa. I haven't followed that closely. I just don't see it. And by the way,
Right.
all of this depends on Democrats winning in Maine by getting Janet Mills on
Mm.
the ticket, and winning in North Carolina, and not losing the seats in Georgia and New Hampshire. Look, I think for Democrats, what they should be looking for is to get 2 to 3 seats in the Senate, and I think 3 would be the goal they should have, and then coming back in 28 and trying to win that last seat that you need with a good presidential nominee in the ballot. And I want to bring up one last point, then we really have to stop. But the last point I'm going to say is, I mentioned this earlier, 2028. Let's talk about it quickly. I know that you're a Josh Shapiro stan. I like Josh Shapiro. He's my kind of politician. But I think that Gavin Newsom has become the front runner for the 2028 Democratic presidential nomination. I think the redistricting vote has really helped him, and I'm not saying he's going to win, because it's a long way to go, and these candidates have to prove that they can win over black voters in South Carolina, which is the most essential primary in the Democratic calendar. But I think Newsom is helped himself immeasurably the last 24 hours.
I agree that Newsom's helped himself. I have 2 words for you to name: Gary Hart, which is to say that the early front runner often does not win. And my thing about 2028 is trying to have this conversation now, to me, is absurd for 2 reasons.
That's fair.
Um, First of all, God knows what Donald Trump's going to do in a day, let alone 3 years, in terms of how bad things are for the country, how desperate Democratic voters feel, but also AI is happening quickly. Trump may get us into wars, multiple, not singular.
He clearly is itching to go to war in Venezuela.
Yeah, Venezuela. Now he's threatening someplace in Africa.
Nigeria.
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 Like, I just think that it's very unrealistic to think that we know in 2025 what is going to matter to voters by the time they're casting ballots in February or March of 2028. It's
That's
just too
fair.
much time.
Can I say one thing about Venezuela? That if Trump goes to war in Venezuela, I actually think that the bottom will fall out of his political support. I think that he's right now at probably the bottom, the lowest point he can get because of the MAGA support, 41-42%. I think he can go lower if he goes to war against Venezuela. He has gotten no benefit from foreign policy adventurism so far in his this nothing from the gunboats. I mean the drug boats, nothing from the going to Iraq, nothing from Israel and Gaza, zero boost from any of those things. I think Venezuela will piss off a lot of his constituents in a very significant way. So I do think that is a real, and I think he wants to go to war there. I think he wants to. Um, uh, Wait, I want to Lynn
I
Musk
just
is
want to make
yeah.
one more point because we didn't bring it up. The Supreme Court was hearing arguments on Trump's tariffs. They were ongoing as we started. It did not sound like it was going well for
It didn't
Trump.
go well from what I read.
Um, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, the Chief Justice, and Barrett were all very skeptical of his arguments. The Chief Justice cited the major questions doctrine, which is a made-up standard that he made up,
Yeah,
which
John
basically
Roberts
says if
invented.
it's a big issue, Congress has to explicitly give you power, Mr. President, to do something. It can't just be ambiguous. But Gorsuch was saying that it's a one-sided ratchet with presidents taking Congress's power. It was not looking good for his tariffs. They may save him from himself because the tariffs are only hurting the American economy. But and the worst thing that could happen for Trump is they strike down his tariffs and he turns around and reissues them the next day under a different power, which just shows that he doesn't believe in the rule of law. That's going to hurt even
Well, I will
worse.
say about that, just 2 things really quickly. I mean, you had this article in Semaphore last week I thought was ridiculous. We're actually reporting by Semaphore to let these senators go off the record to say this, but you had Republican senators basically saying to Semaphore they were desperate for the Supreme Court to take away Trump's power to impose these tariffs unilaterally, which are
Spineless.
spineless fucking cowards. Sorry
Yep.
to curse, but they are spineless fucking cowards because they have the power to do it and they just don't want to do it. They want Supreme Court to do it for them. But they're sending a signal to another group of spineless cowards, the Supreme Court. And I think the spineless cowards on Capitol Hill are going to influence spineless cowards Supreme Court and get them to basically rule against Trump on this issue. And by the way, we will do a favor politically for Trump, although he
Yeah.
won't acknowledge it.
It'll do a favor politically for Trump. And the other thing is, these Supreme Court justices are savvy. They like to play the long game. They understand
Exactly.
that reducing presidential power is going to hurt Democrats as much as it's going to hurt Republicans. And so I think that they will probably strike these tariffs down. They also admitted in oral
Yeah, but
arguments.
that hasn't stopped them from giving presidential power to Trump.
No, no. And I also think like Alito was sort of fishing for this in oral arguments this morning of saying, um, well, if we strike this down, he can just redo it under a different law, right? Should we have to address those other laws as well? Because there's a lot of different laws in the books that let presidents do things with tariffs. So it may end up having a net effect of zero. But it is the first sign of life that the Supreme Court might actually be not entirely spineless, only
Fuck
mostly.
that. No, they're doing this to protect Republicans. That's why they're doing it. They're doing it to
Fair.
protect Republicans in
That's a good
2026.
point. That
This
is
is
a very good
this
point.
is as political as anything else they've done. But based on the way they've ruled over the past year, they should give Trump this power. They've given him power on a bunch of different friggin' issues. They gave him power to basically fire people from commissions. He should. What's it? The Humphrey Doctrine, I think it's called. That was a 100-year-old doctrine that prevented presidents from firing
It's
people who were. I think it's
it's
Humphrey.
it's in something estate. I think was the case,
Something like
like
that, but
in
it's
Humphrey's
a provision
estate
that
or
basically says
something.
they can't get rid of people. The president cannot fire people who are part of like a
Independent
quasi independent commissions, and they
missions.
basically like
Yeah,
upended that rule. They don't give a shit about these. Don't give about the rule of
that's
law.
fair.
Supreme Court is another
That
political arm
you're right.
of the Republican Party.
You're right. You're
And
right. They see that they understand Trump is hurting Republicans, and this is a way for them to help their friends on Capitol Hill.
exactly,
Um,
exactly. So these people are spineless. Whatever. I
All
keep
of them. All of them. I mean, the every last one of them is going to be judged harshly by history. Every last one of them is just a spineless fucking coward. You had it exactly right. That's what they are. From Mike Johnson and John Thune on down, and they go and say things off the record. They won't say them on the record. They're just terrible. Um,
terrible. They're terrible
and
people, and
many of them are now going to lose because of it.
thankfully they deserve
That
to
that
lose.
that's
Not
that's
enough of them though. Not enough
no,
of them.
not enough of them will lose, but some more of them will lose, and maybe by the time we're back with you next week, some of them will have retired because they are afraid of what they saw last
Yes,
night.
folks, keep an eye out for that.
Mm,
When we come back next week, we're going to see if there are any new retirements on Capitol Hill. I would be surprised if there are not a few.
mm,
All right, listen, we need to end this. We've gone on for an hour and 56
Two
minutes.
2 hours.
Almost 2 hours. We got 244 people here at the end. You guys are troopers. We love it. We'll be back in a week. I think we're going to have some special guests on next week. We're going to start bringing on guests to talk about, so that's just the two of us yelling at each other, although we enjoy that. And if you enjoy this, don't forget to subscribe to The World According to Brian, which Brian's Substack, and subscribe to Truth and Consequences, my Substack. Don't forget, independent journalism relies on your financial support. We cannot do this without you. So please, if you like the kind of content that you're getting here from both of our Substacks, please subscribe. And Brian, always a pleasure, my friend.
It is, and this was happy. This was our happy day.
This was
So,
a happy day for Democrats. There's no
and
question
by the
about it.
way, watch the Tennessee House special election at the beginning of December. Just watch that.
Okay.
That is something to watch. I think it's going to be a lot closer than people expect.
But I want to make one more point about Tennessee. I mentioned Tommy Tuberville running for governor and giving Alabama the
Marsha
representation they
Blackburn is such
deserve.
an idiot.
Marsha Blackburn, who also
Such an
is
idiot.
arguably, along with Tommy Tuberville, the dumbest member of the U.S. Senate, is now running for governor, proving again that red states like Tennessee and Alabama get the representation they truly, truly deserve.
Yeah.
And on that note, thanks,
Have a
everybody.
great week, everybody.
Have a great week. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.